I'll have to get you got the login.
She said there's no login, but I don't know.
To establish a quorum.
Okay, the meeting will be called to order. Before we officially call the meeting to order, I'll turn to parliamentary.
Yes, good morning. I'll begin with the chair.
Present.
The chair is present. Vice Chair Brown.
Present.
Vice Chair Brown is present. Member Bradford. Member Bradford is present. Member Grills.
Present.
Member Grills is present. Member Holder.
Present.
Member Holder is present. Member Jones Sawyer. Member Jones Sawyer is absent. Member Lewis. Member Lewis. Member Lewis is absent. Member Montgomery Stepp.
Here.
Member Montgomery Stepp is present. Member Tamaki.
Here.
Member Tamaki is present. Madam Chair, there are 9 task force members members, and the number needed for a quorum is 5. The number present is 7. Madam Chair, a quorum has been established.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. Now that a quorum has been established, the meeting has officially been called to order. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the AB 3121 Task Force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. This is our 13th and 5th in-person public hearing. We'll now turn to our next item on the agenda, which is special acknowledgements. We have on the line Maureen Simmons. Maureen Simmons has a unique 20-year background in human resources management, talent acquisition, and strategic planning for Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies. But her most significant contribution happened in the summer of 2019 when she served as a legislative intern in the California State Assembly for former Assemblywoman Shirley Weber, who's now the state of California's first African-American Secretary of State. During her 8-week internship, she researched and drafted ACR 130 and California's historic reparations bill, AB 3121. She served as a research and policy analyst for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation in Washington, D.C., where she collaborated on the Hard to Count project, which was founded and spearheaded by Stacey Abrams. She also led the statewide movement to repeal Proposition 209 with the coalition of leaders. She is a graduate of UC Berkeley with a bachelor's degree in political science and an MBA candidate at Cornell Johnson School of Management. She resides in San Ramon, where she owns and operates coaching with MOLLC, a professional consultancy company. So Maureen Simmons will provide some welcoming remarks as one of the main or instrumental folks who created or helped to create this task force today. So welcome, Maureen Simmons. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, and good morning. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here today. Today marks one of the final public meetings the Reparations Task Force will hold anywhere in the state. This is indeed a historical moment, not only for the state of California, but in my opinion, America at large. But before we get started, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber, and her staff for challenging the status quo and daring to champion policies that impact Black lives. Without Shirley Weber's guidance and sponsorship of this bill, from the moment I began researching it in her office in the summer of 2019, AB 3121 would not be a reality. I would also like to thank Secretary Weber's former legislative director, Anthony DiMartino. I share my desire to study reparations during my 8-week internship as a fellow in UC Berkeley. With an eye, he affirmed the student leader, future policymaker, but most of all, an American descendant of slaves who wanted to see change. Thank you to Attorney Antonio Moore and Dr. Sandy Darity, who responded when I reached out seeking their insight and expert knowledge about the economic wealth gap in the early stages of my research. Special thank you to Chris Loxton, Tiffany Quarles, Friday Jones, Chad Brown, your chair Camila Moore, and Marcus Cunningham for your unwavering support and advocacy of AB 3121. You are the voices speaking for the voiceless. And thank you to the task force. It's hard for me to believe that almost 5 years ago, I sat in Secretary Weber, then Assemblywoman Weber's office, and researched, then typed the first draft of AB 3121. In just a few months, you will make a recommendation to the legislature outlining the redress for American descendants of slavery, the descendants of Black migrants who came to California and were enslaved by fraud and kidnapping. When Chair Moore asked if I would give the welcome remarks, I told her what I have told everyone who have asked me to give public remarks about my involvement in the development of AB 3121. I would be honored. But as I sat down to reflect upon what I might say, the gravity of this moment hit me, as it did in the early stages of poring over insurance records, looking for every piece of evidence I could find about California's complicity in slavery. But detractors will say, an intern didn't write AB 3121 in 8 weeks. I hear you. And to that, I will reply, you're right. I did not draft AB 3121 in 8 weeks. Actually, it was closer to 5, because I'd already worked a few weeks before my meeting with Anthony about the goals and objectives of my fellowship. And though my formal research may have begun in June of 2019, my interest in the study of reparations happened when I was exposed to Representative John Conyers and HR 40 through published articles. In one article I read as a teen, it outlined an argument of those in support and opposition of reparations. The arguments opposed to reparations were centered on who was eligible for reparations and how much, if anything, they should receive. Those detractors believed that calculating the punitive and compensatory damages for chattel slavery was a futile effort, and so we should just let bygones be bygones. But how can we let bygones be bygones when the knee of white supremacy is still on the necks of Black Americans, choking the very life from us? How can we let bygones be bygones when American medicine was built on the backs of slaves, yet the descendants of those Black slaves have worse health outcomes than their counterparts due to healthcare disparities? How do we let bygones be bygones when Africans forced into 400 years of chattel slavery through kidnapping and fraud undergirded the economic infrastructure of America? Yet the economic wealth gap between the heirs of chattel slavery and whites are a blaring reminder of the injustice caused by that oppressive regime. How do we let bygones be bygones when Black women were raped, beaten, and forced to nurse their white masters' babies on their breast? And speaking of Black babies and women, I want to say this at the risk of being controversial. Lineage matters. Lineage matters because there is only one group, a distinct group, who has a justice claim for reparations for chattel slavery. Lineage matters because it denotes the who, the what, the when, where of the reparations conversation. Lineage matters because reparations is a debt owed to the descendants of chattel slavery in America. It is not a catch-all for injustice. Lineage matters because reparations for the atrocity of chattel slavery should be reserved for American descendants of slavery, period. In its earliest draft, AB 3121 was written with American descendants of slavery in the language of the bill. This was to distinguish who the task force was seeking redress for. Over the next few days, you, the public, as well as the task force, will have the opportunity to make comments, raise questions as we discuss AB 3121. I will say to you, as I said to Chris Loxton when he walked into Dr. Weber's office in that June of 2019, only a day or so after I began gathering evidence for what is now AB 3121. I looked him in the eyes and I said, I understand the assignment. I understand the assignment. And so I say to you, task force, you are assembled with a great challenge. And I pray that you understand the assignment. Your assignment is to make recommendations to the legislature about redress for the descendants of chattel slavery who came to California and were enslaved by kidnapping and fraud. That redress can and should come in the form of compensation, tax benefits, access to housing and land ownership, and access to tuition for education. And I want to emphasize education just for a moment, because as a first-generation college graduate who attended community college before transferring to UC Berkeley, by some accounts, a prestigious undergraduate university, and currently an MBA candidate at Cornell's Johnson School of Management and Ivy League University, education is a great equalizer. Reparations will not correct discrimination. I want to say that again. Reparations will not correct discrimination. The reparative justice that the victims of the Holocaust received did not end anti-Semitism. Neither should ending discrimination be the stumbling block in the way of calculating the economic damages owed to the heirs of chattel slavery. Since AB 3121, other cities and states have adopted or attempted to address reparations, but in my opinion, have fallen short. In my hometown of Chicago, the city of Evanston, for example, planned 20 million in reparations, but spent only 400,000 helping 16 people. St. Louis, Providence, Rhode Island, St. Paul, Minnesota, Asheville, North Carolina have all adopted reparations programs, but it will be the model that is set forth by this task force that is assembled here today, the inaugural task force for the United States, in my opinion, that will set the tone for what reparations should look like here across the US, and it is my prayer internationally. Because make no mistake about it, the slave trade was an international crime against humanity. There is a domestic and international culpability. In closing, I want us to all remember and come to this discussion lucid and sober-minded. When Germany paid reparations to the descendants of the Holocaust in the 1950s, they addressed the atrocities of those heirs, and they continue to pay reparations to this day. And so it's time for California and every state in the US who was complicit in chattel slavery to do more than apologize for slavery. I can't speak for the entire Black community because we are not a monolith, but I will accept your apology on the terms that, in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I believe I can say this for some of us in the Black community, we're coming for our check. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie Simmons. Let's give her another hand for that welcome message. Thank you. So now we'll go to the next item on the agenda. We will turn to public comment. We will go to the phone lines first. In person and in phones, we're doing this equitably, so each person will have 2 minutes to speak, whether you're on the phone or in person. There's currently 33 folks on the phone line, so we can go to the folks on the phone first.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the reparations meeting today. And we are now in public comments. My name's Aisha Martin Walton. I'm with the Department of Justice. And a public comment for those of you on the line and in the audience who've taken the time to come today. Each person, as the chair said, will have a couple of minutes. And please know that, be advised that in fairness to everyone, at the end of your time, you may be politely interrupted. However, please know that there is a public comment period during each meeting, and the task force encourages you to participate. You may also submit written comments at any time via email at reparationstaskforce@doj.ca.gov. So with that, we will begin with the callers on the line. So I will ask for John. John, are you with us?
We are with you.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you've not already done so, you can press 10 to enter the queue. If you press 10 a second time, we'll remove you from the queue. We'll give you a line number and listen for your line number to be called and then proceed with your comment. Once again, to enter the queue, press 10 and you'll be given a line number. Listen for your line number to be called. And we'll go first to line number 22. Please go ahead.
Good morning, task force members. My name is Ernest Russell, and I'll start my testimony today by stating that the California task force should deny any motion or attempt to divert funding or resources from the Freedmen Affairs Agency because it is folly that the defendant community cannot afford. We all know too well, as pointed out by members of the task force based on last hearing, that creating a supervisory agency that cannot offer practical services that will allow said agency to redress the harm is merely a duplication of agencies that already perform statistical reporting or supervisory review of disparities within the state of California. Not only that, but if we look back at Reconstruction, the Freedmen Bureau didn't fail because it lacked the powers to achieve what needed to be achieved. It failed because it lacked the funding and the power needed to achieve the change set out by our Congress after the Civil War. So with that being said, I believe that California can, must, and should do better as it relates to the structuring and the creation of the Freedmen Affairs Agency. We're just now getting started out and fleshing out what an agency will look like after reparations legislation is proposed and what those services would offer. I find it to be foolish for the task force to consider defanging said agency prior to its launch or prior to legislation about said body. Now, my other comments are aimed at lack of community engagement from communications firms. I'm hearing time and time again in California, as well as in other places of the nation, that there is no mention of the California Reparations Task Force as it relates to public marketing and just general communications. And I think that is something that the task force should consider reassessing as we, near the
Excuse
sunset
me,
date of
sir.
the task force.
I'm sorry, sir. Your time is up. Thank you so much for your comments. John, next speaker, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is line number 30. Line 30, please go ahead.
Yeah, my name is John Mudd. I want y'all to understand, we are paying attention. This is not going to be like other government processes where y'all get to scam and no one questions what's going on. So this communication firm that Grill set up with the bunch sitter, that whole thing, we saw the money. We know money was paid out, but we haven't seen anything in return. And I don't understand why this woman gets to continue to propose things that are obviously scams. We don't want any resources to go into the nonprofit industrial complex. We want a full service Freedmen's Bureau set up. So, and look, y'all running around here doing these interviews where you're acting like you don't understand why people are going with the lineage-based stuff, when you had the legal experts in there tell you that this is the best route to go. You had the community tell you that this is what we want. You had Shirley Weber tell you that this is what she intended. And you still got Grills and other people running around here doing interviews talking about they don't understand why we're doing lineage space. So look, at best, y'all are some scammers. At worst, I'm starting to think y'all are agents that are trying to sabotage this whole thing. So again, I just want to reiterate, we want a full service Freedmen's Bureau. We don't want money to go towards all these nonprofits where y'all can hand money to your friends and family and scam the community like y'all probably have been doing your whole careers. This is a new day. We're not doing that anymore. We're not allowing y'all to run around here, act like you're working for us, and you're just lining your pockets.
Sir, thank you so much for your comments today. And we're going to have to go to the next caller, please. Thank you again. John, next speaker.
Next is line 13. Please go ahead.
Good morning. I'm Eric Christian Ramses from the Freedmen Party. Today is extra special. It's 158 years since the original Freedmen Acts were signed. The Freedmen Bureau and Freedmen Bank were passed by Congress and signed by Lincoln on March 3rd, 1865. And when we reference the UN reparations definition of restitution and compensation, these must be included. And if we use genocide as the collective harm from slavery until now, the following institutions are essential. The Freedmen Bank defined freedmen as persons heretofore held in slavery in the United States or their descendants, which was a lineage-based policy. And the Freedmen Bureau Act not only included the promise of 40 acres, but it included hospitals, schools, and courts. And I'd like to end with two quotes. The first is from Du Bois' Souls of Black Folks. Imagine a far better policy, a permanent Freedmen's Bureau with a national system of schools, a carefully supervised employment and labor office, a system of impartial courts and banks. And the second quote is from Frederick Douglass. The mission of the Freedmen's Bank is to show our people the road to a share of the wealth and well-being of the world. It has already done much to lift us into respectability, and with their continued confidence and patient cooperation, it will continue to reflect credit upon us and promote our welfare. And finally, when Dr. King says we're coming for our checks, and he says at the same time we were denied our 40 acres while others got the Homestead Act, he was referring to the Freedmen's Bureau Act, which references our 40 acres and Special Field Order 15. So I recommend the task force look into those. Thank you.
Thank you. John, next caller, please.
Next, we're going to line number 14. Line 14, go ahead, please. Going to line number 14.
Hello, my name is Jolene Tripp. I'm a resident of Oakland, born and raised in Berkeley, California. I'm a fourth-generation Berkeley resident and a first-generation college student. I've emailed prior to the meeting to request accessibility for closed captioning to these meetings. When you were in Oakland, I came in person because of my frustration. But I rise to give feedback on the communications for those needing accessibility. If you could please ensure moving forward that closed captioning is both included in the live streaming and posted on the videos, it would greatly help others that have accessibility challenges follow along. Secondly, accountability from cities. My concern, as the timeline gets adjusted or pushed back, I want to know who's going to answer the questions. Because I've emailed committees, I've emailed the city council members from various cities, and as it relates to our demands. And
Excuse me, ma'am. I hate to interrupt you in the middle of your statement, but if you would turn your mute your video, we're getting a little feedback.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, that might be better. All right. Thanks. Go ahead, please.
As I said, my concern as the timeline gets adjusted is those who are answering are not being accountable. They're not being accountable, and I want to know who's going to answer for our demands. What's going to require the cities to be accountable to their constituents? And with that, I will yield the remainder of my comments so that others may participate.
Thank you so very much for your comments this morning. John, next speaker, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, if you're listening to this meeting on another device, please mute that device before giving your comment to avoid feedback and echo. Our next line is going to be line number 32. Line 32, go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. LaDonna Williams. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so I want to direct this comment to Senator Bradford. Last meeting, you mentioned that you corrected me actually, saying that you were not paid. Mr. Chris Lodgenson got up there and complimented you all on the board for your efforts, which we in the public do as well. But he also went on to say that you guys are not paid for this effort. And when I said, in fact, you are, you corrected me and said, no, you're not. Well, according to Assembly Bill 3121, Chapter 13, Article 3, Membership, letter I and J, it says both legislative and not legislative are reimbursed and compensated for their efforts. The point of making these points is the fact that there needs to be transparency in this process. When it comes to the public, the amount of money that we have put forward, especially in San Francisco, the $5 million, folks are backtracking and tippy-toeing around this issue. We've been adamant. You all are paid and you should rightfully be paid for your efforts, but we should be paid for the harm and damage that has happened in the past and is continuing. It hasn't stopped. I don't understand why we have to have meeting after meeting. We have more than enough documented facts to show that we are do these reparations. So again, match San Francisco and San Francisco hold it down. $5 million to start, and then ongoing payments and tax and exempt those from taxes. We are due this. You have the documentation already. To extend this out any further is doing harm. And yes, absolutely, your communications is failing our communities miserably in being able to figure out how to properly engage with you all. to
Thank
be
you so
part of
much
this
for your
process.
comments this morning. I hate to cut you off in the middle of your sentence. John, next speaker, please.
Next, we go to line number 19. Line 19, please go ahead.
Yes, my name is Marcavius Johnson of Keppera Books. I'm the owner. I wrote the book Land of Milk and Honey on Amazon, Instagram, Keppera the Movement. I want to deal with the history of not the Freedmen Bureau, but Quiver 14 between Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Banneker during the time the Constitution was written. And that is the actual document that shows the resources we were supposed to be given and what's unknown to history to the school and prison pipeline. I think that should be tabled. I think the summary judgment also with the education, John Henry Clark, Chunk Uncle Diop, Dr. Alvin Van Sertima, and Dr. Ben Joseph Yakinen, UN observer missions are worthy of note in the Aboriginal Land Act of 1976. And the debt, the only time the national debt has been at zero is Civil War. So if we looking what's old, we need to be looking at the national debt. And we also need to look into the Non-King Treaty when the British people were bringing drugs, just like they do in the healthcare industry, to Asian people and made them pay reparation with the reverse engineering. So we need to look at how they play these games through the healthcare system to play this. And Dr. Amos Brown, he should look at Ezra and Nehemiah, though I'm not holy. I have an Egyptology background and a Queer 14 ideology. And we need to look at the eugenics and the Red Summit at W.B. Du Bois, because remember the Secretary of War was indicted in 1885 for exploiting free territories in the Holocaust. And we need to address the involuntary servitude and the writ of habeas corpus when it comes to the psychiatric industry that is attacking our manhood through eugenics. And we need to learn agriculture and commerce. And unless we indict the Klan through Nuremberg trials, our reparation efforts will be stifled. Thank you.
Thank you so much. John, we're ready for the next speaker.
Next, we go to line number 37. Line 37, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Savannah Simone, and I'm calling from Los Angeles, California. And I just want to know, have any records or any documents been subpoenaed to be included in the final report that addresses Oliver North's position and the federal government showing that they were involved in the distribution of cocaine in the Black communities of Los Angeles, which ultimately expanded throughout the United States. And as a result of this, it has caused tremendous generational destruction. We lost a lot of lives. We have what is known as, referred to as crack babies. And I'd like to know, is that going to be part of that final report? And I really wanted to also address Don Tamaki and Lisa Holder. I'd like to know that. And also, what is the plan to, or is there a plan in place to let residents in California know that reparations, Black reparations is real, and how can they become involved, and how would they get their allotment? Those are my questions.
Thank you so much this morning for your
And
comments.
that's it.
Thanks a lot. John, next speaker, please.
Next, we go to line 41. Line 41, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jane Johnson. I'm calling from Los Angeles. I'm calling because I have been watching and monitoring the communications groups. I think it's called the Charles Communications Group. Last task force meeting, she said that she was going to have all kinds of different events and different types of innovative, creative ways to get the information out about the task force. And I have yet to see anything. I mean, I follow her Instagram, I follow her Twitter. Excuse my language, it's piss poor. Post. Everything is wrong. It lacks luster. It seems like it's lazy. She's still making small errors about dates and times. I mean, what are we doing? You guys have been here for 3 years. And this should be, that room right now should be packed full of Black people who are concerned about reparations, and it's not happening. Like, something has to be done about the communications part. There should be thousands of people watching this YouTube video right now. Where's this money going to this woman who's supposed to be getting the word out about reparations? I mean, she's blocked me on Twitter because I'm asking questions like, what's going on? And she's blocking people on Twitter because they're asking about where's the freaking communication? This is not fair. And there's also some bias because I've also noticed she's not even posting about all the task force members. She's only pointing out a few. And the ones that she's pointing out, the one that's never there, Joan Sawyer, he's never there, he's always late. She's posting about him. So where's this money going? How is this woman going to, she said she was going to have innovative things last task force meeting. Where's the innovative things? Where's
Thank
the
you.
creativity?
Thank you so much for your comments this morning. I'm sorry I had to let you go. John, next speaker, please.
Next, we go to line number 57. Line 57, please go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Mark Johnson. I live in the gold country, the heart of the mother lode. I would like to mention that slaves were brought to California during the gold rush by Confederate sympathizers. California was on the verge of splitting into Confederate and Union camps. The only slaves that were in California were brought here by Confederates. California never had a state statute saying that slavery is permissible. On this note, I would like to say that I don't believe a single person deserves restitution in any form unless they are a Native American. Native American tribes were butchered, slaughtered, pilloried. They were put into slavery. Nobody gets a dough until the Indians get one. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next caller, please. John.
Next, we go to line number 52. Line 52, please go ahead.
Yes, this is Claudia Fitzgerald from the Placerville area, and I'm not as learned about all these other things going on, but the guy that just hung up, I have to feel the same way, that why is the state of California even doing this? This should be a federal thing, just like they did with the Japanese internments. And the American Indian is the one who deserves reparations in this country the most of any one of us. But besides that, listening to all the stuff that they want to do for reparations and tax rebates or whatever, it sounds terribly complicated. And it's a typical California. It's open to massive fraud right from the get-go. And that's what's going to happen. It's going to just be a tangled mess, and there'll be a lot of people getting money who really don't deserve it. And if you're going to do it, it should be direct lineage to those slaves that were brought in here, and not just someone who moved from another country in 1985. I just think that's wrong. So that's all I have to say is I don't know why California is even doing this. This should be a federal issue. Thank you.
Thank you. John, our next speaker, please.
Next, we're going to line number 24. Line 24, go ahead, please.
Good morning. My name is Jacqueline Clark, and I live in Lemon Grove, California. And I just wanted to comment on one of the statements in your interim report or recommendations, where it's saying the California African American Freedmen's Affairs Agency. I do agree that we need infrastructure that will help support these reparations being issued, and that the recommendations of to correct the injustices that it have an organization have oversight over it. However, I am disagreeing with the name Freedmen's Bureau, Freedmen Bureau's agency. It failed. We need to look into why it failed. It wasn't just because of the lack of funding. There was a whole lot of other things that we have to consider in this day and time. We have too many other organizations and opportunities to get this right in this day and time to make sure that it is done fair, equitable, and that the recommendations from the California Task Force are actually carried out. So using freedmen in front of everything, freedmen don't agree with everyone, even though they're saying lineage, they don't agree with everyone's lineage. And they disrespect it online, on Twitter especially. So if we're going to talk about establishing an agency tasked with implementing the recommendations of this task force, we need to make sure that the role of the agency is not just to identify the past harms and prevent future harm, work with other state agencies and branches of California's government to mitigate harms, even from the agency that is calling itself Freedmen. That's my take on this. I do believe we need the infrastructure. However, I just don't agree with Freedmen. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. John, our next speaker, please.
Next, we're going to line number 17. Line 17, go ahead.
Is this right?
Line 17, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Good morning, members of the task force. I'm very thankful for the leadership of Shirley Weber and those who are seriously studying the evidence and needed reparations. I'm a lifelong educator. I taught grades kindergarten to university over 39 and a half years, and I'm based in Sacramento. I have ancestors who had a role in perpetuating the results of chattel slavery and acts of racism, inequalities that are clearly perpetuated today. Our history divides America. We can do better through reparations. We can make this effort to heal ourselves. I strongly urge a first round of reparations to the ancestors of Black veterans, many of whom were denied the benefits of the GI Bill, specifically housing loans and educational stipends. I also urge a round of reparations to the Black patriots who aided our cause in the American Revolution by assisting through military service, clothing repair, feeding, and financial and medical aid of troops. We have the databases that identify these Americans. The U.S. government has the database for the GIs, and the sons and daughters of the American Revolution have established a significant database of Black patriots and their lineage. Let's start with these clear lists of Americans who were denied their rights. Let's begin to level the playing field through low-cost loans and free education for their ancestors. Then let's continue to schedule reparations for the long list of cruelties that have been perpetuated against African Americans. Thank you for this opportunity to give input.
Thank you very much. John, next speaker, please.
Next, we're going to line number 26. Line 26, please go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Milana Davis, calling on behalf of Constance White, daughter of Silas White. We would like for his story to be heard and on record. In 1957, Silas White was a 52-year-old Black entrepreneur who purchased an abandoned lodge that had sat vacant for 13 years. He envisioned providing a safe space for Black people in the few places they were allowed in Santa Monica at the time. In 1958, the city of Santa Monica decided that they needed this abandoned building for public use. The property was seized under the guise of eminent domain and had been demolished by 1960. My uncle protested and attempted to fight the city and also put signs of protest on his seized property. The city successfully stole my uncle's land and his dream to provide safety for his community. This was a man who had most definitely pulled himself up by the proverbial bootstraps, and the city of Santa Monica proceeded to knock him back down and steal his boots, his dream, his opportunity to provide, not just for his family, but for his community. He died in 1962, just 4 short years after they seized his property and demolished his dream along with this building, crushing his will to live and shattering his heart like the panes of glass that were destroyed with that building. Interestingly, the city of Santa Monica had just had a series of events in honor of Black History Month, listing on our website Black History Month 2023 centered on Black resistance. Silence White's resistance has not been honored nor directly addressed. His daughter, Constance White, has not been reached out to in any way. Their actions thus far would seem to be perfunctory at best. Again, Silas White purchased a building that sat abandoned for 13 years. The city took that building from him for public use, yet it was not used for that purpose and is now the site of the Viceroy Hotel. Where is the celebration of Black resistance that was exhibited by Silas White in 1958 when his property was taken by the city of Santa Monica? I yield for the time and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just a time check-in, Sher Moore. We started at 9:25, and so we have time for 3 more callers before we switch to in-person. All right, John, next speaker, please.
Next, we'll go to line number 33. Line 33, go ahead. Line 33, clear, your line's open.
Hi, thank you so much. I happened to forget my line number. I'm so sorry. So I just had a couple things I wanted to bring up. Just overall with the just reaching further audiences. I know I have other friends that are interested in the reparations and the task force, but it's just really hard to get the information to younger people, you know, I guess you would call Gen Z. I'm 19 myself, and I just kind of wish there was more reach for people that are younger. And also, as mentioned, the closed captions. Closed captions on the YouTube video, they aren't available. Is there going to be a transcript for the hard of hearing? I definitely hope so. But just, that's all I wanted to bring up. I'm hoping for more like, and more of an online presence from the task force. That's all.
Thank you. Last 2 speakers. John, next speaker, please.
Next, we're going to line number 56. Line 56, go ahead, please.
Hello, is that me?
You.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I keep hearing Evanston mentioned as a reparations model, but if we dig deeper, we can see all the ways in which it has failed. You had people too wanton to get their name on a piece of legislation that supported a bill that was highly inadequate. I'm urging the task force to contact Antonio Moore, UCLA trained attorney and present at the signing of the AB 3121 legislation, so that he could give a 15 to 20-minute expert testimony on how the local reparations legislation became disorienting. From lack of funds to people dying before they could receive it, to a recent publication reporting that they had to relax the rules against cash payments because 2 recipients did not own homes. There are tax implications that people could be responsible for, and the grant is only for $25,000 in a place where $25,000 doesn't even cover the cost of a down payment. Antonio Moore has also reported on how the Bruce's Beach situation was not as it was presented to be, and how the family may not have actually been given controlling interest of their land, and how the once it was bought back, there was a cap on how much the city was willing to purchase it for. All of these are just examples of how the scale of reparations continues to be undermined and woefully just misrepresented. And so I think that if the task force can just own in on the size of the repair, and which parts of the repair would be federally funded versus what we can actually do realistically on the local and state level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John, this will be our last caller on the line.
Yep, and our last comment will come from line number 25. Line 25, your line's open. Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to John and Amy for making it possible for me to give these comments from afar. This is Raphael Plunkett calling. I am with CJEC, and I'm on the phone from Diamond Bar. I'm sorry I couldn't join you in person this morning, but Joe and I are here as we have been every meeting from the very beginning. I want to give a special thanks, first of all, to Ms. Simmons for that really profound and enriching, welcoming remarks, and for all of her work to get us here. I thank the task force and the staff for having the weekend meetings. A special thanks as always to Dr. Weber. Please know that I support lineage-based plans specific to the descendant community, not universal or race-based plans. I support federal reparations. I also ask, again, to get the interim report into California libraries, high schools, college campuses, senior citizen centers, etc. There's a lot of education in that interim report, and it will answer a lot of these questions before people even present them. I ask those of you that are legislators, please present legislation to support reparations. Get creative for us. I ask that you all aggressively fight misinformation and disinformation. And once again, that interim report will help with that. I ask for ASL and closed captioning. There's a lot of people that can't participate, and this is really a shame. Please include them. I ask that you please hold more in-person meetings, including the weekends. Please know that your exceptional efforts are supported and appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the in-callers. Now we would switch to in-person, and please remember you have 2 minutes, and for in-person folks, I have special cards for you. You'll get a 1-minute notice and then a time up. So that way we can make sure as many people as possible can be heard today. Thank you. Please go ahead.
My name is Reggie Romaine from LA. I've been the meeting since the 11th one. And I just ask everybody, can we all get along? Can we just stop coming here? Can we just stop coming here bickering on them? Man, it's all gas, no brake right now. We got to come up with some solutions. All this bickering, that's water under the bridge. Now, I got some solutions. Now, listen. First of all, who in this crowd want they 40 acres in their mule? Who want their land? Okay, let's get some solutions to get this land. The money gonna come. But my solution is this for genocide. And I'm going back to when I first started. These jails, these prisons, they just destroyed us. They're not rehabilitating us. I didn't understand at the last meeting, Mr. Sawyer, you brought up the jails and then we brought up the contaminations and everything. Were you talking about us having it and renting it to somebody else? Or are we gonna get it? Because we need to be agape love to our people. 3 a day is dying in these jails in the United States. This is going to set an echo. Okay, we got second and third strikers. We leading in that. That means it's a black hole. I told y'all my brother in 2011 passed away. My brother 4 years ago, first offense for a manslaughter 311. He got 27 alive at 54 years old. So that's a black hole for him. My solution is this. We need those jails that we freed up. That's only 300 acres apiece. California is 100 acres, 100 million acres. The government owns 45.5 million of these acres. Start breaking up some of that land so we can rehabilitate our people, so we can start, bringing them back to the community. We got to bring them back out of there. Or when they pass away, just let them be able to look at us and say, I died in front of some black people. Yes. So give us these jails. I beg you to give us these jails. They gave white folk 5 years, 5
I'm
acres.
so sorry to cut you off, sir, in the middle of your sentence.
I'll be back tomorrow.
That's right. That's right. Everybody will be here. Great. Thank you so much. Next speaker, please.
Hello, board members. I'm asking you to do something now, today. Either write letters, call, or do whatever you got to do to stop the RFP for the Fillmore Harris Center in San Francisco. We need to stop that. That building was built for the Black community. And now it's got an RFP on it. My name is Ken Johnson. I'm a native San Franciscan. I'm representing myself and Black Wall Street and other organizations. I'm speaking specifically about the Fillmore Heritage Center in San Francisco. Now the building was built to revive the Black community, what the city did to the Black community. You all know about San Francisco and what it was a thriving, it was once called the Harlem of the West. Now it's not. Now, the only building that we can do something with to help train youngsters and community members, it's got an RFP on it. It's ridiculous. And you need to write letters or call the city or do whatever you got to do to stop the RFP. See, excuse me, I'm sort of getting motivated. All I'm doing, folks, is asking you to stop the RFP and use some of the reparations money to acquire the building and do whatever it's got. It's very little that needs to be done to the building. Then we can use the building to help stop crime in the area, train our young people, train them to have marketable skills, so we can reduce the crime and make our community safer. You're sitting up there and you have power in your hands, so do something with it. Call or stop it now because the RFP is out. You can call and write letters.
Sir, thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. Thanks for coming out today. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good morning, task force. So I'm Daniel Landry from San Francisco, also like Ken, and I sit on the Reparations Advisory Board in San Francisco with our great historian, Dr. Brown. I want to thank you. And at the same time, hearing the passion coming from our people and hearing even those who said some things that I didn't like, by the way, on the calls, it really bothers me for us to not realize, like what the brother was saying, that here in America, it's about the land. Whether you're talking about 40 acres or 1 acre, ultimately, real estate is rooted in land. So as a member of that advisory committee in San Francisco, people keep asking us, why 5 million? Well, why not 500 million? Because you can never repay for the damage have been done to Black people in America. So let's be very clear. And as OG told me in the streets, you're not a man until you got land. Let's deep dive into the land issue. Because when I look at Article 34 and I look at the covenant restrictions here in the state of California, this was the common way here in California and America. They didn't have to say Black exclusion like they said the Chinese exclusion because it was the way of life. Racism, ignorance, stupidity is a way of life here in America. So I want to be very clear, land, land, land. And Abrabagate, Hotep, healthy land, not toxic land, like Bayview Hunters Point. So I know I only got 2 minutes, but I want to thank y'all for being a punching bag, because we're going to be a punching bag as a committee in San Francisco. When the people come up and say things you don't like, take it. Because look what our people have went through here in America. Take it. It's all good. I'll be a punching bag for you. Come to San Francisco, let me have it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming today. Next speaker, please.
My name is Gloria Perot Dyer, and I live in Roseville, California. I have an unusual story in that I grew up in the town of Allensworth. I will show you now the certificate that was awarded to my father, Jefferson Piero, who was instrumental in helping it to become a part of the California Department of Parks and Recreation. And this was awarded to him. He is now deceased. But I will say in that connection that growing up in Allensworth was an extraordinary experience in terms of being able to see how racism affected an entire town. My family moved to Allensworth in 1953, and by the way, has maintained a presence there ever since. Our family farm is still there and still in the family hands, which by the way, as gentlemen before me mentioned, the land is so important. My father, when he bought that land, there was no well on it, and the farmers around him, the white farmers all around him had wells. We didn't. Our house had no running water. We had to haul water for like 11 years. Then Sergeant Shriver came to our house. This was President Kennedy's brother-in-law, and helped get wells in the community. But the point I'm going to say, since I have very little time, my family has done a lot to build up the community of Allensworth. And what I wanted to say, it represents something, okay? It represents something because it was built by ex-slaves and so forth. Now, lastly, I would make this observation. If you want to do something, it's not going to solve the problem if we just throw money at it. Land, as was mentioned, and also programs and resources to undo the psychological harm that has been done by being surrounded by hatred for centuries.
Thank you so very much for traveling here today. Next speaker.
Peace, greetings, and grand rising, California Reparations Task Force panel. I am Yvette Yaira Coburn. I am a native-born Los Angeles, Californian, who descends from powerful ancestors that were enslaved 400 plus years through the transatlantic chattel enslavement, where I have personally traced my own family lineage back to the early Virginian colonies of the 1600s. I am honored to be standing here to share my own testimony and proposal, not only as an advocate of the reparations movement, but also as a professional genealogist with root trackers, also known as learning DNA genealogy. I have had 6 years of success breaking brick walls in several American Black freedmen family trees through the paper trail and genetic genealogy, helping orphans, adoptees, and those who were missing one parent. I have not yet heard a discussion of using a genetic process to have as an additional qualifier where one's ancestors that are from this Northern Territory genetically during chattel enslavement, in addition to providing a family tree with the Freedom Bureau. The paper trail is not always proven to be correct, as there are known non-paternity events to discover through DNA for all. Please let me know who on this task force I can reach out to present this in more further detail. And furthermore, we must have our own agency. Otherwise, there's no true healing and freedom from the 5+ harms that is still relevant and present today. Please be mindful, empathetic, compassionate, and productive in your decisions in delivering any sense of long overdue repair. Power to the Freedman family.
Thank you. Next speaker, you may begin.
Hi, good morning. My name is Kamji Ansley, and I'm here. I've traced my lineage back. On 3 sides, I'm back to the 1600s, and I'm still on this soil. On one side, I got back to 1868, and that ancestor said he was born in Africa and that his mother and father were born in Africa. On the other side, I've gotten back to the 1700s, and we're still in California. We have never left California. I've read the Reparations Task Force study, the report. I'm actually almost on the 9th chapter of my 3rd reading of it. And I haven't found any case law in there where it is the state of California versus Freedmen. I know that there was a freedman town that came here from a general who served in the military. He actually got his training from a freedman school. He taught in a freedman school after serving in the Philippines. He came up through Texas and then bought some land here, mid-Northern California. My concern is that when we're dealing with California and when we're dealing with our ancestors and when we're dealing with freedmen, I need to find out where the freedmen were in California, because my lineage going back to the 1700s doesn't have anyone who has money in a freedman's bank. They didn't belong to a freedman's bureau because they lived in California, and they've been here since the 1700s. And I do have concern about that, because there is, like people have said on the phone, an outcry, even from our chairperson of this task force, who's on Twitter, and she reps the freedmen. I just found out the other day that she said, it's on her Twitter page, I screenshotted it, that this reparations is only for people who were in the transatlantic slave trade. But then then she also talked about genealogy and taking DNA tests. At the bottom, it says for entertainment purpose only.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you in the middle of your sentence. Feel free to come back tomorrow or submit your comments in writing. Speaker,
Madam
please.
Chair, members of the board, those of you here and listening to the sound of my voice, I'm Morris Griffin. I'm better known as Big Money Griff, strong community activist, leader, and problem solver. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that when the brother talked about the prisons, we've got to emphasize that the reason why our black men are in these prisons is because of crack cocaine. And who brought that crack cocaine here? Noriega, Bush, and we have to say Arkansas. Clinton knew about it too, especially when he got that NAFTA and GATT and took away all of our jobs. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here right now to say there's only one thing that would stimulate this economy, and I need you to spread the word, what you heard, to Governor Gavin Newsom. And that one thing is capital, money, reparations. That will stimulate this economy for the 2.6 million blacks in California. There's only one thing that would stop our children from busting into these liquor stores and grocery stores, stealing junk food and stealing different things, and that's reparations. There's only one thing that would stop our kids from busting into these jewelry stores, stealing watches and jewelry, and that's reparations. So I need you, Gavin Newsom, to understand that if you have an intention of running for the presidency after Biden gets his presidency, we need you to understand, so goes California, so goes the nation. And if you clean up this state for the homelessness, and Karen Bass cleans up her city with the homelessness, that can be a 1-2 ticket. Spread the word, what you heard. Not only can you do it here in the state of California, but so goes California, so goes the nation. Now,
I'm so sorry. I have to. Your time is up.
Oh.
But you can come back tomorrow. And you can submit your comments in writing. Thank you so very much. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Tiambe Jama, and I say something every day, and that is, we honor our ancestors by doing our best work every day. All praise to God, our African God and African ancestors. When you say this, you stay on point. So my point here today is, for me, the reparations movement, yes, we need money, but the most important thing is unity. Unity of purpose. With that, we're gonna make it, okay? Functional unity in the old days, okay? That took away homelessness, come on now. You know, the thing with the values. And the other important thing to me is young people got me here today. Yasmin has organized in our area, East Palo Alto, and we have information regarding the, was it Charles Webb did a report on how crack got to East Palo Alto and decimated it, you know? So unity of function and purpose will get us back to knowing what our enemies are and having shields and strength against them, because they always put out different kind of enemies. The enemy now is Black women and Black men against each other. Let's get it together, okay? Once that together, that family thing, no things against us no enemies formed against us will prosper. We can do that. We have our African blood in us. Let's do the right thing. Thank you for doing what you're gonna do, and there's multiple ways to freedom, okay? And of course, you know, you guys have the knowledge. Come on now. Our elders in my building, I've met 2 elders, they're 85. They told me about doing cotton. I didn't do it, I was from the north. They told me about that, how it did their bodies, you know, so you see them all bent over. That's it. Is that all?
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Feel free to come back tomorrow or submit your comments in writing. Thank you again. Next speaker.
Hi, good morning, California Reparations Task Force. My name is Dr. LaWanda Wesley, and I come from you as a native of Oakland, California, a daughter of Oakland, and raised by Black Panthers. I do come before you on behalf of Black Californians United for Early Care and Education. We have a 10-point plan that addresses reparations in the early education workforce for our babies. If you guys don't know it, you can visit that by going to blackece.org. But what I want to do just shortly before you is just acknowledge that in the interim report that was published in June 2022, it did a great job of addressing a lot of challenges around reparations approach for K through 12, but it did not address the gaps that impact the early education space. And knowing all of us start our journey in life as an infant, making our way to preschool before we get into kindergarten. So with that, I'm going to get quickly to the point of what we're asking in our 10-point plan for Black children, Black families, and for the Black ECE workforce. And ECE means early care and education. So we're asking that we dismantle and separate unequal education, that by providing funding for African-American freedom-owned, controlled childcare preschool programs, K through 12 schools, colleges, universities, trades, and professional. We ask that you provide additional funding for early care and education settings with at least one, where there's at least 1/3 Black child in that population in direct classrooms, adopt mandatory child development curriculum for early educators that include culturally responsive curriculum that's anti-bias and is pro-Black. We ask that you provide Black families and stop pathologizing us by providing universal basic income for Black families, especially those who are mothers. And we ask you to dismantle and address stolen labor, which hindered the opportunity for many of us as early educators by providing property to those who are Black-owned, Black-led childcare providers, real estate, land, and so on. And then lastly, we ask that you
I'm
address
so
the wealth
sorry
gap
to
by
cut you off in the
prioritizing
middle of
grants
your.
and contracts to Black early educator providers.
Thank,
And thank you for your time.
thank you for your time. All right, can you hold on 1 second? Is that Chair Moore? Did you want us to just continue? Okay. All right, please. All right.
Good morning, Task Force. Honorable Camila Chair in the Task Force. My name is Natalie Champion, and I am representing the California Black Women's Health Project. We are a 29-year-old Black-led legacy organization that serves the 1.2 million Black women and girls throughout the state. And I want you to know that we are here to support the unprecedented work of this task force and applaud the recommendations in your interim report. I'm specifically here to speak about the maternal health aspects of the report and offer up some additional recommendations to include. We know that Black birthing people are dying in unprecedented numbers, not because of what they've done or have not done, but because of the lineage and legacy of harm inflicted on our people. And so with that, I would like to share some recommendations to include fully fund care from a doula and midwife for conception planning, pregnancy delivery, and postpartum care for African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States, including free lactation education and support for every stage of pregnancy, including education to postpartum care. Fully fund pipeline programs to recruit and train African Americans interested in becoming a doula, midwife, lactational professional, or other birth worker, including fully funding their educational tuition, materials and supplies, certification, credentialing, insurance, business license fees, and CPR and NPR training requirements. Black doulas and midwives should be respected and accepted as providers and part of the care team in all settings, including home births, birthing centers, hospitals, and clinics. Fully fund Black clinics and birthing centers owned and operated by Black healthcare professionals and wellness practitioners, including health and wellness centers without limitations, redlining, and medical bias. Pay Black birth workers, doulas, a thriving wage, and also include in the Office
Thank you
of
so
Black.
much. I'm so
Freedom-
sorry to
Thank you
interrupt
so much for your time.
Thank you for all that great information. Next speaker.
Good morning, Chair Moore, Vice Chair Brown, Task Force members. My name is Marcus Champion. I'm a member of NAASDLA and CJAC. I'm from Inglewood, and I live in South Central. I want to begin by saying that I believe Member Grills' motion from the last hearing should be re-examined and rescinded. The Office of Freedmen Affairs should be instituted with full autonomy. A natural byproduct of the process will be utilizing community-based organizations, but as of today, there are no CBOs whose sole focus is the African-American descendants of persons enslaved community. In my opinion, it will be an injustice if certain facets of the distribution of reparations be mandated at the outset to organizations that don't have our sole interest as their prime directive. I also want to bring attention to the first proposal draft. I applaud you all. Your work is tireless and thankless, and you've created a body of transformative initiatives. My problem, though, is quite a few of the proposals are either race-based or universal. As we know, race-based policy violates the Constitution, and universal policy is not reparations. I want to highlight the Indian Child Welfare Act case, Holland v. Bracken, that was recently heard by the Supreme Court. The opposition claims the program gives adoption preferences of Native American children to all Native American families, making it race-based. The side arguing on behalf of the act says that it's not race-based because all Indians don't qualify. It is specific to federally recognized tribes. That means the program is not accessible to state tribes or anyone just because they identify as Indian, making this a status-based program that is legal. I say all that to re-emphasize our reparations is lineage and status-based. Honor the vote you made in March last year and what is constitutional. We've come too far to fight losing battles just to appease ideology. Change each proposal to uniformly state they're for the African-American descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take the next two speakers and then we'll do a check-in. Please go ahead. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? My name is Lloyd Kelly, and I am here from New Orleans, Louisiana. As Ms. Simmons said earlier this morning, that she believes that what California does with reparations, so will the nation, so will the federal bills. So clearly, I really believe in what we're doing, or else I wouldn't have got on the plane, flown down here to be here today for this meeting. Next, I'd like to say that just because you look like me does not mean that you are for me. And I would say that anybody that would put up legislation that would take away control of reparations, our money for what we went through for 400 years, is not for me. Finally, I'd like to say that yes, I'd love to see cash reparations in the hands of every American freedman in California. But if you do nothing else, do this. Give us back our identity. We are American freedmen. It's a simple question. Either you are or you're not. Either you descend from people that used to pick cotton and feed white people, or you're not. So California, if you don't do anything, take the opportunity and the power that you have to give us back our identity. And with that, I will yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming so far. All right, this will be our last speaker before we do a check-in. Please, good morning, and go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning. I would like to say good morning to Chair Moore, Vice Chair Brown, and the entire task force. My name is Darlene Crumity. I am with CJEC as well as ARC Bay Area. I would like to take the time and thank the task force for holding these in-person meetings, and I've been very fortunate to attend all of them. I would like to thank the task force for its historic vote on March 29, 2022, that voted for the community of eligibility based on lineage for descendants of U.S. chattel slavery. As I stated last month, I'm doing a deep dive on the interim report that was released on June 1st of 2022, and I want again to thank you all for your time and effort that went into this report. In Chapter 6, Separate and Unequal Education, on page 221, there was a reference to Berkeley in the Riverside busing. But what's not mentioned was the closure of my elementary school in San Francisco in 1966, Dudley Stone. Elementary. I was then from the 5th grade on bused to white schools in the Sunset. I was bused to Lawton Elementary. If I may read the first paragraph of this, and I have plenty of copies if anyone would like to see it. The first paragraph reads, Dudley-Stone School in the Haight-Ashbury District is a slum school. Most of its students are Negroes. Many of their parents have sometime been disturbed over conditions that were of bad plumbing, the cafeteria was too small, and there was inadequate play space. I didn't remember it that way. What I remembered was my 2nd grade teacher, Miss Roberta McGruger, allowed these Negro students to be able to take pets home and learn how to care for them. What I remembered was my 4th grade teacher, Mr. Carter, a descendant, who taught us the value of who we were. And as a matter of fact, that was the last Black American descendant teacher I had until 1973, when I attended San Francisco City College, Mr. Nash.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Thank you so much for that statement. Feel free to submit your comments in writing, or you're welcome to come back again, and we will take one more speaker until we check in. Thank you. Thank you again for coming out.
Good morning, task force members and the audience. My name is Phoenix Star, and just as my name indicates, rising from the fire and ashes of destruction to give birth to a new life. Reparations is American freedmen's rebirth and renewal, known amongst our communities as Reconstruction 2.0. For those that are confused, descendants of American freedmen are those that descend from a great lineage of people of formerly enslaved that intellectually and built this country with our intellect and free labor. We are owed a debt by this beautiful state of California for the harms it did for freedmen seeking refuge here and its descendants, and we also are owed a debt from the United States of America. Now, regarding our most valuable reimagined legacy institution known as the Freedmen's Bureau, the suggestion was to have it serve as an advisory organization by Ms. Grills. Let me be very clear. Ms. Grills or anyone seeking to parcel out our repair to be distributed to nonprofits and NGOs is looking to grift and steal from us. Just as the communication firms that Ms. Grills was in charge of, that didn't go over well, did it? Where are the results from the communication firms? Why isn't there an American freedman or African American lining up outside of these halls? Didn't go over well. So why would we ever take a suggestion from you or anyone else to suggest that we cannot cover our own repair? So
I'm
let
so
me end by
sorry.
saying
Your,
this.
your time is up. I'm so
Dear
very
task force
sorry.
members,
I'm
Freedmen's
so
Bureau
sorry.
administration
Your
body, we
time
will
is up.
elect and we will support all of
Vice
the
Chair
members we
Brown?
want for our reparations.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming out. All right, well, please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Heaven Nicole. Just to say, when people say, can't we all just get along? That means you really won. I'm a blogger for the Black American Heritage Club and a volunteer that reads the Reparation Intern Report on Twitter called the Section 8 Space. I'm standing on Bloodline Business. I'm wearing a Black American Heritage flag by Melvin Charles and Gleason Jackson. The Black American Heritage flag is an ethnic flag that represents the culture and history of Black people. Drop the Pan-African flag and get you one. By planes, trains, and automobiles, I've traveled. I am a dedicated Black Californian who can trace their lineage past the 1865 census, and we are more than slaves. My people have went through several disparities, as I'm sure you all are aware of. Unique disparities, one that cannot be compared to any other race. And we do need time to highlight how uncomparable we are. I'd like to extend a token of gratitude for the extension
and being honest that the reparation proposal is not ready for Black Americans. I also, I think also gives it more time for Black Americans to understand what's going on in California about reparations, although we're at the end still. My criticism is that we need more communication to the Black Californians immediately, so that we won't feel like this is a botched job, you know, for reparations. And as a Black American, I will suggest persons that are not of the lineage, even if you're for reparations for Black Americans, should not take public speaking spaces from Black Americans. I noticed that is a
I'm so
representation
sorry.
of Black Americans at this.
Thank you for coming
it's a
out, but your
misrepresent-
time is up, and I'm so sorry to have to
all right,
interrupt you.
My time
but
is up. All right,
yes,
Black.
your time is up.
All right, cash
Thank
payments
you
for
so
Black
much.
Americans. All reparations.
Thanks for coming
I
out.
need local, state, and federal.
Thanks
and
for
vote
coming
for
out.
Deion
Your
Jenkins and
time
Max
is up. Before the next speaker, Chair Moore, I'd like to do a check-in with you, please.
10 minutes, and then we're gonna go to the next agenda item.
All right, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, first, this panel, we've got to end the scams, right? Like this extension is all political theater, missed deliverables, right? A failed report that doesn't accurately describe, which is why many people are coming up here and having to say the words lineage-based reparations, right? We need lineage-based reparations. If your ancestors did not pick cotton for and grow food for white people to eat, then we're not talking about you. So first of all, lineage-based reparations, and we got to end these funny terms. We can't be bickering over freedmen versus not. Like we got to end these funny terms. And lineage-based reparations will do that. The focus on the lineage, right? Secondly, you know, the way that you guys are moving, right? Some of you are not here ever, as pointed out by many calls. The panelists that have burner accounts and oppose Black Americans on the panel, ridiculous. Like this is all political theater, and it needs to end. I almost cursed. Money spent on marketing campaigns that who's seen an ad here? Who's seen an ad on TV to come in here? No one. Exactly. Who heard an ad on the radio to come here? No one. This is ridiculous. How does $1.5 million get spent on what? And the scams and the bullshit. I'm out.
Thank you. Next caller, and just a friendly reminder, you have 2 minutes in fairness to everyone behind you. Please go ahead. Thank you for coming out.
Peace to the Tribe 5. Peace to the Rundown Boys. Peace to my ancestors. To the cosplaying chair. Due to your consistent, condescending, disrespectful behavior on social media, we as Black Americans are demanding and commanding you to step down and step aside, effective immediately. You come from a bloodline of tethers. I come from a bloodline of feathers. We are not the same. So, in the words of my great big mama, and to my fellow historian that comes out of 757, get your ass up and K your ass. Now, lineage-based reparations, it is what it is. Meet me about a Tesla, we could talk. Lineage-based reparations, that's how it's going, all right? So I'll land right there.
Next speaker, you have 2 minutes, please.
King Bishop in the house. King
Bishop
Sher
Williams.
in the house. Hey, this is a real slave like he was. Respect him. Listen at it.
My name is Bishop Henry Williams, and I'm a cotton picker from Alabama. I'm 88 years old, and I spoke in San Diego in front of everyone that I was a real slave in the state of Florida, in the plantation of Florida, and everything, and where they had killed many blacks that were double-barrel shotguns, young Black kids, and buried them and everything, and I had proof of that. And I spoke in front of y'all in San Diego I said, one thing that I would like to have something in my spirit ever since I escaped from there, that I promised these people that I would come back one day with some people and everything and free all of them and dig these bodies up. You know what I mean? And I've been in front of the police department with this story. I've been in front of the press, the news, the FBI over the years several times, and nobody come out to support me. And I have a missing granddaughter here in California for over 2 years. She's been missing right here. And the press don't deal with no parts of that, of my missing granddaughter. And my son is here to father that daughter. He gonna speak on it after a while, but we need support. And to this afternoon, Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock, the meeting started about 4:30 at the Port of Oakland. I'll be speaking from the Port of Oakland for land and building and property and everything. There in Oakland, I want to see everybody that's black that need a home, that need an apartment building, they get it, okay? That's my drive now in Oakland, California. I have all
Pastor.
the proof. I've been doing this for over
Bishop,
50 years.
Bishop, thank you so much.
Over 50 years in reparation, everything. I have all the proof of everything I'm doing and everything I'm saying. But I need support. My family needs support, okay? And
Thank you, Bishop. Thank
I
you.
made this speech in front of y'all in San Diego. Nobody called me. One lady put it in the newspaper that I was a real slave and what happened to me in Florida. Nobody from the committee and everything. There shouldn't be a committee that's run by Ku Klux Klan. I'm gonna tell you that right now.
Thank you, Bishop.
Ku Klux Klan.
Thank you very much.
People on the sideline, everything else.
Say your granddaughter's name.
What's her name? Sharon Williams.
Sharon Williams.
Let's go, Brother Bishop. We'll be back tomorrow, brother. We'll be back tomorrow.
And don't forget his 40 acres in that tractor.
The next speaker, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Bishop William, he is our honorary chairman, so we give honors of respect. Moving forward. 9 committee members, Dr. Amos Brown, Cheryl Grills, Lisa Holder, Scott Lewis, and Don Tamaki, all were chosen by Governor Gavin Newsom. Assembly Attorney Redmond chose Joan Sawyer as well as Chairman Moore. And we have Senator Tony Atkins, who chose Stephen Bradford, and Councilwoman Montgomery Stepp. Now, when I think about reparations, I don't think about a Scottish governor, a Mexican assembly, Anthony Redmond, or a gay Caucasian, Tony Gale Atkins, senator. That's who chose these 9 members. I want you to be very careful. We don't expect non-Blacks to tell us how we're going to get reparations. We got to mobilize it by ourselves. It's power to the people. And I appreciate Heavenly, as well as Brother Reggie and many others who come, natives who speak their mind. But reality is, if we don't put foot to power, you guys cannot make the final decisions on reparations. You have to listen to the people. No shade. Each of you are probably nice in your own right. Probably go out and have a drink or something. When it comes to reparations and repairment of a damage, this is serious business. Tony Atkins, Gavin Newsom, and Anthony Redden should not be the final say-so on why you're dragging your feet. So no shade to you, but we have to get reparations, not by you. It is power to the people. You hear what I'm saying? Stop backbiting and talking shit. Let's be and put that paper and make them work, because they're not the final say-so. You are. You are. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one more speaker. Go ahead, sir. Please begin.
My name is Dion D. Jenkins.
Please. Go ahead, sir.
My name is Dion D. Jenkins. Reparations is the extension word of its root word repair. Repair meaning to mend damage, to make whole. Okay? Understanding the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause is not being enforced by our country and our government is a problem. And it is a violation of the Constitution. Black Americans are being negated out of their constitutional rights. We must understand that reparations are 4 elements. Defensive structure, meaning enforcing the law, armed forces, specifically for Black Americans. Specifically for Black Americans. Understand that there must be cash payments. There must be land. There must be the access to capital, meaning building up your own infrastructure, creating grants. DMLG, Defense Money Land Grants. And this is why I don't think this is reparations, but we'll take it. This is a California monetary atonement. But however, I'm running for president in 2024. Dion D. Jenkins, I ran for senator last time, and I ran for president twice in 2016 and 2020. And I'm putting in my bid right now. We're gonna get reparations, DMLG, I land.
Thank you very much. Chair Moore, Task Force, does that conclude our in-person public comment this morning?
Yes, so we are concluded for today, but a staff member will take everyone's names down who's in the line so that folks can return for the next period of public comment. So thank you all for folks who joined in the phone lines and in person. A staff member will come over shortly and take your names down.
Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.
So the next item on the agenda is item number 4, which is approval of the January 2023 meeting minutes. Members of the task force, we've been able to review the minutes. Are there any questions? If not, may we entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
I move for approval, Madam Chair.
Second.
It has been properly moved by Vice Chair Brown and properly seconded by Member Jones Sawyer that the task force approves the January 2023 meeting minutes as presented. Any discussion on the matter? Member Groves, you're recognized.
I just want to make one edit correction on page 31. It says evidence-based incarceration, and it should be education-based incarceration.
Any other discussion? Okay, hearing no discussion, I'll turn to Parliamentarian Johnson for a roll call vote that the meeting minutes be approved as presented with the minor change of changing evidence to education.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this time, I will call the roll and take the vote for the minutes, for the approval of the minutes, excuse me, as amended. Chair Moore?
Aye, excuse me.
Chair Moore votes aye. Vice Chair Brown?
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown votes aye. Member Bradford?
Aye.
Member Bradford votes aye. Member Grills?
Aye.
Member Grills votes aye. Member Holder? Aye.
Member Holder votes aye. Member Jones Sawyer.
Aye.
Member Jones Sawyer votes aye. Member Montgomery Stepp.
Aye.
Member Montgomery Stepp votes aye. Member Tamaki.
Aye.
Member Tamaki votes aye. Madam, excuse me, Madam Chair, there were 8 members present and voting. There were 8 ayes, 0 nays, and no abstentions.
Thank you. There are 8 ayes, 0 nays, and thus the ayes have it, and the motion carries. The January 2023 meeting minutes are approved with the slight change to change evidence to education. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is item number 5, discussion and potential action. Advisory Committee's report on recommended answers to experts' 5 key questions, economic expert analyses. So to reiterate from our last public hearing, myself and Jovan Scott Lewis, who will not be able to be here today, we have been tasked with working with the team of economists around, answering the economists' 5 questions, and then we have to come to the task force for more clarity for the economists. So just to summarize, the 5 questions are as follows. What are the damage timeframes? This becomes even more important for the prioritization of African-American descendants of persons enslaved in the United States, 1865 to 1960. Will there be a California residency requirement? If yes, how will it be determined? I think that question is still open for discussion. 3, what year determines the beginning of harm? Are there different starting points and endpoints for each atrocity category? Will direct victims and/or all African-American descendants of U.S. slavery in California who meet the residency requirement be compensated? Based on the last conversation, it seems as we said the latter, but again, that is still up for discussion. And then 5, how will reparations be paid and measured to ensure the form of payment aligns with the estimate of damages? And that is also open for discussion. So I will turn to the economists who are online and in person to provide a high-level summary of the work that the committee and the economists have worked on since our last hearing. Any guiding questions that you all would like to ask to the task force so that we can continue this discussion. But I do want to be sensitive to the fact that member Jovan Scott Lewis isn't here. And so I don't think that we should come up with any action today on this issue, but we can continue the conversation and the discussion.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having the expert group back to kind of present a summary of what we have done so far, where we're heading, and to get some direction from the task force as we figure out some next steps. Based on the last meeting, to kind of give a high-level summary of where we are, we have continued to meet with both the advisory group, the DOJ, and we still have our estimates of the 5 harms that were outlined that I'll just remind members of the public and the task force of. We were looking specifically at harms or atrocities for unjust property takings by eminent domain, the devaluation of Black businesses, housing discrimination and houselessness, disproportionate Black mass incarceration and over-policing, and health harms. These were the 5 harms that were identified based on the amount of data that was available and based on what the expert group thought was appropriate in terms of calculations for a methodology. We have come up with estimates for some of these 5 harms that we presented last year. These estimates have not changed since we have not been given any new data, but we are working with the Department of Justice to identify either updated data sources or to refine some of these estimates that we have come up with, specifically for housing discrimination and houselessness. disproportionate Black mass incarceration and over-policing, and we still have our estimate for health harms. We expect to have an estimate in place by the next meeting for the devaluation of Black businesses. One thing that we have continued to face a challenge with in terms of giving estimates for some of these categories is just the availability of data. To come up with estimates that are robust, that will stand to, we expect criticism, we expect attacks on methodology, but as an expert group, we want to make sure that we have things in place that we can defend. And data has been a huge limitation. So this is one of the things that we continue to work with the Department of Justice on, to get appropriate data for these particular categories. In our next iteration of this, there was one thing that the expert group met and talked about that we wanted to present to the task force. And it's that even though we have identified these 5 harms or atrocities because of data and methodology, we do want to recognize that there are other harms, and we might not have data or a methodology, but they should not be pushed aside or should not be the focus of when we look at redress and reparations. So just a reminder of some of the harms that we looked at initially, even though we identified 5, or intellectual property deprivation, segregated education, non-representative estate commissions, labor discrimination, environmental harm, and transgenerational effects. So we will be presenting these again, irrespective of maybe not having data, or even just presenting a summary of a methodology so that they could be acted upon when the task force actually comes together and decides what is appropriate in terms of the different categories of harms or atrocities. That's the kind of high-level summary we have so far. I don't know if any members who are online, Kirsten or Thomas, wants to chime in on anything else.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the task force members about the high-level summary that she just provided? If not, we can continue the conversation potentially around where we left off in terms of what could be the residency requirement. I know the last conversation we had was, conversations around residency versus domicile. Again, these questions are to provide the economists with more direction for the work that they need to do to help us develop a numerical figure for each of the 5 harms that they've identified. Yes, Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
Madam Chair and members of the task force, in the area of the 5 areas that you mentioned, might we not focus more on the harm of the confiscation of land? Land. We shouldn't just gloss over that and mention it generally. Vernon Johns, who preceded Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at Dexter Church in Montgomery, once said, if you want to see a classic example of perpetual motion, sell a Cadillac car to a Negro and tell him to park it somewhere. Alone in 1900, we owned about 19 million acres of land. But now we have less than 3 million. Our brother said earlier, who was so passionate about these prisons, something that's very much on point. We look at how land was stolen from us. in the Fillmore in San Francisco, in West Oakland, in South Central Los Angeles, and other areas of the state, and even Allensworth. Reverend Allen Allensworth had in mind utilizing that land for the purpose of replication of Tuskegee here in the West. And that dream was destroyed because of the evil of those whites. So I think we should sharpen that matter of land. It's basic, it's fundamental. Real estate, land. The Jews still about fighting over the promised land. I hope we do that.
Can the economist kind of speak to that, like the types of data that you all currently are working with around the area of unjust property takings? And is it as comprehensive as kind of what he's suggesting? If not, like what type of data do we need to ensure that that harmed area is as comprehensive as possible?
The unjust property takings data that would be needed would be very individualized from what we know. A lot of it would be based on state data related to eminent domain, particular areas, huge capital investment in terms of highways that took people's homes, huge developments of stadiums and waterways and a lot of different public areas. And the impact to the particular families and homes that would be part of the damage group is what would be needed. So far, we have not been able to put our hands on any of that data for the identification of these particular projects, these particular highways, families that were affected specifically. We have heard testimony from the public that might be very specific, but in terms of a calculated group of data for these individuals, so far, we've not been able to dig into anything of it related to this. It might be the case where there's a process of self-reporting that the task force might figure out what that would look like in terms of operationalizing that, the same way we hear testimony. There's a lot of people who know of their parents and grandparents and even themselves who might have been displaced by some of these things that I'm talking about. Capturing that data has been a challenge. On the other side, the actual projects and eminent domain, there should be records of that because it is action from the government. Yeah. So getting that data would come from a government data source. And then from that, we would be able to put something together in terms of calculation or estimates. But the biggest category so far in terms of challenges, and probably one of the categories that really is a tremendous amount of focus based on what we just heard Vice Chair Brown kind of reiterate, is related to land, unjust property takings, and eminent domain. And it happens to be the biggest data challenge that the expert group has so far.
Oh, sorry, Member Holder, you're recognized.
Thank you for that presentation. I do have a follow-up question around these data sets and identifying where they would potentially be housed. Has your team given thought to specific agencies that might be housing this data, whether it's Caltrans, because of the building of highways and freeways, or some other agency that will likely still have these data sets intact?
Yes, even from last year, we kind of identified very broadly the different categories and the different organizations. And we have been, and the DOJ has been pretty helpful in terms of identifying these bodies and putting us in contact with agencies that might have this data source. So we have started the process of categorizing agencies, projects, whether they be stadiums or highways, as you said, and then using the Department of Justice that have a little bit more weight in terms of getting data to help us identify these particular sources. So we have.
Member Jones Sawyer, you're recognized.
And I'm glad you meant this on. Okay, thank you. This is an interesting topic because we may have a real life example that you might be able to get, and we may even have records. I know in Los Angeles, there's something called the Century Freeway that went through a lot of African-American communities, Compton and different places, and displaced a lot of African-American families. In addition, there was a fund that was set up to try to compensate a lot of those families, and I'm not sure if it adequately compensated them, if they were even able to buy or replicate the homes that they had, because that's another consideration that a lot of people don't understand. You may get payment for your house when they do eminent domain, but a lot of times you can't get the equal value because of appreciation that have gone up and the property values going up. And so I wonder if that could be, because obviously there's a lot you could look at, but if that could be a microcosm of looking at a way that you could look at how looking at reparations for land, that there a way we could come up with some calculation or look at how people should really be compensated for the taking of land by the government unjustly, and even though it was for a public purpose, but how to compensate for that, and maybe figure out some kind of numerical or financial compensation with that. And I know we're getting to the end of that, but I'm hoping that maybe we can find some old records, or I can have my staff help you try to look up and dig up some of those records with the Century Freeway. I think that may be a good example of how a government can come in, take African American land, and then not really adequately compensate African Americans.
Yeah, you're right on the money in terms of the methodology that we're thinking about. It really is about taking property, and even with compensation, we already know, even without looking at data, that it's nowhere near the value that it needs to be. And that's the gap we want to capture. Having this data would definitely be a good starting point to even capture one gap and maybe think of a way to kind of extrapolate what it looks like if we mimic other areas. If we could get our hands on that particular data to start that process off, you got compensated for $1, and that dollar is worth $10 today, but that particular property is worth 10 million, then that gap is what you're owed. That's the idea behind the methodology we want to capture. But without data, we can't begin the process. So if we could get our hands on this type of information, that's exactly what we want. What happened? What neighborhoods got impacted? How much were these individuals paid? And for sure, we know what the value is today. The gap between those two is definitely a particular loss that would be captured in this eminent domain piece. And even with one freeway, we could begin a process of figuring out what makes sense in terms of extrapolating highways generally. And even if we get one stadium, like, let's say Staples Center, then extrapolate, or one waterway, then it's a way to start the process to figure out what it looks like on a broad scale.
Thank you.
Member Groves, you're recognized.
Thank you. I just had a quick question. I just want to make sure, and if you said it, I apologize, but I wanted to understand what you meant by the problems with access. Is it that you don't necessarily know which agencies would have the data that you need, or that those agencies are being non-responsive? Or is it that the quality of the data is such that it would be too much to reformulate that data to make your calculations? I'm not sure what the access problem is.
So it's probably a combination of what you just said, because the data is coming from a lot of different sources. So highways would be one, government projects would be one. So it's sources of data. Some agencies might be great at collecting data, but it's not necessarily the data we need. So take, for example, that member Joan Sawyer just outlined, a particular freeway. Okay, we might know that a particular freeway, the Central Freeway, ran through these neighborhoods, but we would also need to know what they were paid. That might be a different agency. And we would also need to get a sense of the value of what that property is today. That's also a different agency. So I think it's a combination of. I don't think it's a matter of identifying the agencies. The DOJ has been helpful in terms of helping us with the identification. It's the access to the data, and getting the right data so that we can make these calculations. I think it's a combination of what you just outlined.
And is there anything that the task force can do to help get better access, particularly if it's an agency that's being non-responsive or an agency that may need to actually put some time and effort into reformatting data to make it useful for your calculations?
I think a good starting point for us is just like the example that member Joan Sawyer just gave us. Here is a very specific example, and I know where to get this data, and I can help you directly to get this. Because sometimes I think for us, even just one identification will allow us to get a sense of what it looks like for similar projects. So even a source of, on a very personal level, a lot of the members of the task force are experts in particular areas and know specific examples and might have access to data a little bit more readily than even the DOJ, I might argue. I think that would be helpful. These very specific projects, these very specific freeways or government capital investment, that would be a beginning example. The identification of the agencies, we will look again at what they were, and kind of communicate with the DOJ again. And if there's a sense of their particular agencies that are not necessarily providing the data in a form that we can dig into, then I think that's something we can definitely relate to the task force, maybe through the advisory group.
Thank you, Dr. Grills. Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the task force. One classic model is the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency that began in 1948 with a plan to not revitalize an area, but to remove Black people. And it began with Justin Herman and Ali Odo. And that represented 6 acres. The evidence is there. They even did a study about 10 years ago, an assessment. And their final finding was they wronged the Black community. If they did redevelopment again, they wouldn't do it the way that they did it. That's evidence. Right before us, the facts. And that's the reason why that Black community has been wiped out from 16% now down to 4% in San Francisco, so-called liberal progressive San Francisco.
All right. Yeah, also there's an organization called Segregation by Design. They've essentially used data and historic photography to document the destruction of communities of color by redlining urban renewal, freeways, and disinvestment. Most of the cities they've covered have been outside of California, but they have started with Oakland. So that might be a good organization to get in contact with, so we can follow up with that later. Okay, so I don't want to take a step back unless other folks have any questions or comments on this kind of thread. but I want to, okay, I want to just start with the first question so that we can just have some clarity and then just move forward to the next questions. So the first question are, what are the damage timeframes? This becomes even more important for the prioritization of African American descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. And so based on the conversation we had last time, please correct me if I am wrong, but based on the conversation we had last time, when we talk about the 5 harms for unjust property takings, I believe we said the damage timeframes would be 1850 to present, and we said 1850 to acknowledge what Vice Chair Brown said in terms of acknowledging that the harms against the African American community started with the state's founding, and then present would be, qualified as the date whereby Governor Newsom signed the legislation into law, so September 30th, 2020. And so essentially we said the damage timeframe for unjust property takings would be 1850 to essentially 2020. For devaluation of Black businesses, we said it would be the same, 1850 to present, which would be 2020. Over policing and mass incarceration, we said it would be 1970 to present, acknowledgement to the experts' recommendation on that. Health harms, I believe we said would be 1900 to present, and again, present would be 2020. And then housing discrimination would be 1933 with the advent of state-sponsored redlining to 1977, which would be the end of so-called racist redlining via the Community Reinvestment Act. So first, I wanted to get any clarity from the economists around, does those proposed damage timeframe for each of the different harms, does that pose an issue? Is everything okay? And then I wanted to turn to the task force members to see if those damage timeframes work as well.
Thomas, I'll let you jump in since some of these timeframes are probably in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, the timeframes make sense. It is, again, a problem of the data that will be available. So for, I think for redlining as a specific injustice, that doesn't cover all of housing discrimination, and it doesn't cover all of the time. Like in the last session, we talked about gentrification, which is not covered, and it's an injustice. But for redlining specifically, we can make a point. It was attributable to the discretion that the state of California had, and therefore we can attribute it to the state of California to make a very conservative point and make it defensible to attacks from reparations opponents. Now with health harms, going back to 1900, that is a question of whether we can get data to 1900 of the Black and white life expectancy. On average, we have so far data for the past couple of years, but we might have to make simplifying assumptions and come up with rough estimates based on the time frame. But I mean, the time frame itself makes perfect sense, but the question is whether the data will be available to make the calculations.
I want to clarify there is no action coming out of this particular, unless we want to, but I want to be sensitive to member Scott Lewis is not here. So this is us continuing the conversation, and then we'll continue to have the conversation at our next meeting later this month. Okay. Does any other task force member? Tamaki, you're recognized.
I guess, Dr. Campbell, I could appreciate the lack of data being a problem because you're making economic calculations. You need that data. So is there a sense of the plan to identify and get, for example, for the Fillmore, the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency that Pastor Brown identified so clearly? And I'm guessing, because I'm not an expert in this area, but each one of those takings was tied to a document. that was essentially the eminent domain condemnation notice, and then an offer of some value that then would be agreed to typically by the owner, because the owner would have no choice. And so where are those? Now, the redevelopment agency is no more. So are those documents within the city of San Francisco, or are they located somewhere else? Or do we, for instance, if we wanted to take the Fillmore as a microcosm to extrapolate the destruction of other communities in California, and we just are focusing on the Fillmore, which is an example because 20,000 Black residents were displaced and almost 900 Black businesses destroyed. We know that. So is it a question of getting to that data? And if so, is there a plan to approach that?
I think it's one, getting to the data and also combing through these volumes of data. So we might have cities within states and towns within cities. So actually getting a really comprehensive measure of eminent domain and this concept of land takings. We could have a couple of cities, but it probably wouldn't be complete. San Francisco land taking is very different from the Century Freeway, for example, and it's very different from Fillmore, for example. So these documents might exist, but the human capacity from the expert group to comb through each of these and to get a comprehensive measure is not something that we could probably complete in the timeline that this task force has. One particular thing that we wanted to think about, not only for the land takings and given the timeline and data, is to empower this task force to know what the methodology should be. And given that this data is now combed through, presented, and collated in a way that can extract all of these eminent domains in different cities and towns, that a methodology could be in place that would allow some other agency or some other process to figure out what a comprehensive measure might be, because we know we will not come up with one by the timeline that's given and the amount of data we have to go through. So I think one thing the expert group has been talking about is how do we empower the task force to make a decision to say, we know that these harms exist, they're not going away, we know what the timelines are. Once this data is available and this data is available, this is what you need to do. And that could be a recommendation from the task force, rather than some of our categories are calculated where you have a range and the task force would make a recommendation on that. But some of these will be where it's a recommendation on, here's a methodology, this is the data you need to get, and once you have it, this is what you do, and this is now your estimate after you have done these things. So we have been working on a way to make sure that we give the task force enough information to make this recommendation on next steps, because the process doesn't end here in June. So that's one thing the group has been thinking about, not only for these 5 categories, but from what we have heard and from what even the task force has presented to us, things like education, things like labor discrimination, transgenerational effect. If we have a methodology, this is what you do, this is what you need, and these are the next steps. So that's something we have been talking about presenting probably by the next meeting.
Member Montgomery Stepp, you're recognized.
I just had a question, and I know that we talked about this at the last meeting, but the housing discrimination and houselessness and cutting that off at 1977, just based on the Community Reinvestment Act. I think I'm having an issue with houselessness being wrapped up in the same category and cutting that off at 1977 because of the statistics now that we have in the state of California where, you know, our cities are occupying 5-6% of the population, but 30% of the houselessness population right now today. And so, the time frame in my mind kind of covers laws that prohibited the ability to purchase. But there are additional reasons why people are sleeping on the street, why Black people are sleeping on the street. That is one of them, but there are others that don't, and those reasons, the laws that created that situation did not stop in 1977. So I'm kind of having a hard time with that cutoff date. I understand it from the expert's perspective, but I feel like maybe that should have some subcategories or something like that, because we're in my mind, and I could be wrong, but kind of assuming that all of houselessness was caused from this period of time where African Americans could not purchase homes in the way that their white counterparts could based on subsidies. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I'm just having a hard time with that.
Yeah, you see all the economists nodding their heads in terms of measurement that you have presented. You're right on the money. I'll let Thomas speak to that a little bit more for the 1977, and then maybe Kirsten and myself might chip in.
Yeah, I totally share the sentiment that is very unsatisfying to have that cutoff date 1977. And as I mentioned before, this is only for redlining, so it doesn't cover the entire injustice of housing discrimination and houselessness. And I agree that houselessness is very difficult for us to capture because the way we're thinking about it now, it's that redlining basically caused the lack of housing opportunities for African Americans in California, and is therefore indirect a cause for houselessness today. But as you mentioned, there are other causes as well. Housing discrimination and even redlining did not end in 1977 with the formal ban of it. So again, this time frame is only made to come up with one specific injustice that we can clearly attribute to state action, to the lack of discretion that California, or to the discretion California had, but chose not to act on, to make a case that this is measurably the amount of money that California chose to take out of African Americans' pockets. That there is a lot more will have to be stated in the report, and basically the idea is we come up with minimum amounts of loss estimates, and the reparations task force should feel free to go beyond that based on the fact that certain injustices we know happened, but we don't have data to calculate specific losses. So what we come up with are very conservative estimates, and also timing-wise, as Dr. Campbell said, we might propose a methodology how to measure some of these injustices, but can't do it by the deadline of the report. So the task force may consider making recommending a down payment with a clear promise that more shall come as further research is being completed, which should also be part of the reparations package. That's just a recommendation for the task force.
May I add too that some of this may be captured under the health harms category. You're talking about morbidity rates. You're talking about especially maternal and child health And so these are things that we can measure. But I absolutely agree with member Montgomery Stepp, that this is, we're not capturing this entire condition, and houselessness is a grave, grave situation in California that needs to be looked at very carefully. But Thomas is correct. We don't have all the metrics that we need to measure it.
I appreciate that. This may be an ask of the DOJ, and I don't know if we have time, but the Community Reinvestment Act essentially it was helpful, but really the banks get a report card, and there are no repercussions. There's not really much that is done on a federal level to enforce or hold accountable those that are governed by the Community Reinvestment Act. I am wondering if there are subsequent laws that were passed that also tried to further progress that the Community Reinvestment Act was trying to do, that we could also look at as part of that timeframe, that were maybe enacted after 1977, because that act is almost, really, in my opinion, it's almost obsolete at this point. I do serve on a local reinvestment task force with banks under this guise, and we really, we don't have much teeth at all to do what we really need to do. So I would just, if there are other areas of law or things that were passed after 1977 that maybe we can use to broaden that time frame, I would, maybe you all have already looked into that, but I would just ask that that be researched as well.
Okay.
Okay.
I know it's not something that we have looked at in any detail, for sure.
Okay, no, I appreciate that.
Other areas of law. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm just uncomfortable with 1977. So, but yes, I also agree and appreciate the fact that you all will be providing next steps. I think that's going to be so important for us from a policy perspective. Thank you so much.
And if I might chime in once more, we can provide model calculations that use the same methodology for more current housing inequity. So we could provide those model calculations, and then we could present a stricter model with just the 77 cutoff point, and then a more open model. So that might be a possibility to go about it. It's just we're opening ourselves up to criticism, but that's not necessarily a reason we can't provide those alternative calculations.
Yeah, no, I would love to see those, and understanding that this is really a big challenge, and it will be challenged. So we have to have as much information and data as possible to back up our decisions. I would love to see a broader spectrum of those calculations. Thank you.
Yeah, just in response to the point you're raising, Monica, and you're feeling unsettled about that year, especially as it relates to houselessness. I think one of the descriptive categories that always comes to mind when I think about houselessness and what caused it to mushroom out of control is really the deinstitutionalization policies that happened in the 1960s and were fervent in the 80s and 90s, right? So that's obviously a 20, 30-year period that's not covered by our time frame. And so I'm thinking of descriptive categories like that, like deinstitutionalization, basically getting rid of all of these mental health hospitals and, shutting them down and not reinvesting the money into the community. So you had community-based hospitals, which caused the houseless population to really explode. So I think, maybe just thinking along those lines of descriptive categories to address this issue of houselessness with more specificity may be one way to go.
I agree, and the last thing, I forgot to say this, but you made me remember mass incarceration, and that's really huge when it comes to houselessness in our criminal legal system, and how Black people have interacted with that system, and what I should say, the reverse, the system has interacted with Black folks as a part of systemic racism and white supremacy. That also is a big, something I think that we can use, can be in that category as well.
Okay, thank you for that. So are there any other comments from the economists on the first question? If not, we can move to the second question, and we have 15 minutes until the next agenda item. And again, this is purely to continue the conversation that we'll continue to have at our next hearing, where there probably will be more finality around these 5 questions. So the second question is, will there be a California residency requirement? If yes, how will it be determined? And again, this is a question the economists have posed to the task force for more guidance. So before we go to the task force to discuss this particular question, I just want to make sure the economists, do you all have any comments on this particular question?
No, not that we discuss further beyond just presenting the question to the task force.
So at our last task force hearing, it was a really great discussion around, what should I think we all agree that there should be some type of requirement. I think the discussion is still open-ended in terms of how it will be determined. There was conversations around, if there's a residency requirement, what should be the length of time? I think Member Grills mentioned it should be somewhere around 9 months to correspond with the California residency requirement. I believe Senator Bradford brought up the concept of domicile. And so, yeah, there's still, debate around what should be the requirement. Should it be based on residency? Should it be based on domicile? Either of the two, what should be, the length of time? Does anyone have any comments, strong feelings on that particular question? Member Grills, you're recognized.
So I actually wasn't recommending the 9 months. I was giving examples.
Oh, okay.
There's the example from like the DMV or what have you, and then there's the example from the community colleges and state colleges, et cetera. But my recollection from the January meeting, when we discussed it, we did come to a consensus that there should be a residency requirement, but that you and Member Scott Lewis were going to come back with more precise recommendations to present to us today.
Well, I do have suggestions. I just wanted to allow for folks to say their piece on it. And then also Member Jovan Scott Lewis isn't here today. But we did discuss, he doesn't necessarily have any, strong recommendations, but I did share my recommendations. So my recommendation is that instead of residency, we do go with the domicile requirement, a domicile for a period of years. So you would have to prove that you were domiciled in the state of California for a period of years before Governor Newsom signed the legislation into law. And I think that, I am suggesting domicile in part because of the presentation that the advisory committee gave in, December in Oakland, where we talked about what does it mean to be a Black American Californian. There are specific lived experiences of Black Californians, from, the Watts riot of 1965, Watts stacks, LA riots, the Black Panther Party of Oakland being formed in 1966 and the various different chapters throughout the state of California. Well, there's specific events that I think characterize what it means to be a Black American Californian. So, the idea of a residency requirement where it's just 9 months you would have to prove, I think it kind of goes against the spirit of what it means to really be a Black American Californian. So, I don't know what the period of years would be for domicile, but I am suggesting that we go with the domicile rather than a residency requirement. And then, we'll just have to figure out what would be the period of years. And then also another open-ended question from the task force at our last hearing in January was around the issue of whether if you've moved from California since Governor Newsom signed the legislation into law, should you still be eligible? And I know there was some concerns, well, if you moved, maybe not, but my personal recommendation is that those who have moved from California since AB 3120 was passed into law, they should be eligible under the international concept of right of return. You have legal scholars like Deborah Archer, the president of ACLU, who gave expert testimony to the task force last year. She's written a law review articles on the concept of the right of return as a form of reparations. And so, my take is that, folks who have moved from California, I think moved is not the right word, they've been displaced. There's been data to show, for instance, that from a period of 2010 to 2020, over 60,000 Black Californians have left LA County, either to other cities in the state, but majority have left to other states because they can no longer afford it. And so my critique is that if we leave them out, we are not accounting for their displacement that wasn't of any fault of their own, but was because of anti-Black policies in the state. So just to recap, again, I'm not necessarily speaking for member Javon Scott Lewis because he's not here, but in terms to guide the conversation, my personal recommendation is that we go with the domicile requirement rather than a residency requirement, and then we would just have to establish what would be the period of years for domicile. And then we also would allow for folks who have been displaced to be able to be eligible under the international concept of right of return. Montgomery Step, you're recognized.
Thank you. I'm still thinking through what you just said, but in the meantime, I did have a question, and this is probably more for our experts here with regard to having a cutoff date and with the harms and some of them going to the present at the time that the bill was signed by the governor. Wanted to know if in the event that you all are using census data, that cutoff would hinder some of your analysis. I mean, that was a census year and we'll have quite a bit of information using that. And so I just wanted to make sure that that was not a hindrance to September 30th date and that it may need to be December 31 or date, it just based on you all's analysis.
I don't remember us thinking or discussing that being a hindrance to any of the calculations. I don't know if Kirsten or Thomas might correct me if I'm misinterpreting, but census data and this California residency, I don't remember us having a discussion of it being a huge hindrance in terms of cutoff for any of the calculations.
Okay, that's fine. I'm okay with that. The cutoff date we talked about last time. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any feedback, comments on, the suggestion around domicile and accounting for those who've moved and or have been displaced? Member Gross, you're recognized.
I was just wondering, do we have a definition of domicile and what would be used as proof of domicile?
I think, I don't know, Member Bradford, did you want to raise what you raised last time?
Sure.
Well, the legal definition for domicile, you have the intent to remain.
Yeah.
So did you want to elaborate on?
When you're absent, you'll return.
Yeah. A domicile is a fixed location that you intend to return. You don't have to do it daily. It's like our men and women in military or in college. You're stationed somewhere else, but you're considered domiciled if you originated in California. So your original home that you plan to return to.
And I know for domicile, for folks who are trying to like get their green cards or whatever, they have to, different levels of government have different requirements to prove the domicile. Do we have any idea what the requirements might be?
No. Member Gross asked, can you repeat that just so people?
Different levels of government have different criteria that are used to establish or to prove domicile. Do we have any idea of what kind of criteria we might use? Well, as far as timeframe and actual documents you have to produce to show that this is in fact, you do have a domicile claim.
No, at the present time, the advisory committee does not have that information, but we could, collect that information and present it to the next task force hearing later this month. It's 11:41. I think I'll go through the third question, which is, what year determines the beginning of the harm? Are there different starting points and endpoints for each atrocity category? I think that is clear via the first question, so I think we're good there. Will direct victims and/or all African-American descendants of U.S. slavery in California who meet the residency or domicile requirement that's still to be determined be compensated? Based on the conversation we had last time, I believe Member Joe Scott Lewis introduced the idea of this ecospheric idea that all descendants of U.S. slavery would be eligible. And so there's that, unless other folks have any comments on that. But I think before we end, we have 3 minutes. I really wanted to get some clarity from the economist on the fifth question, which is, and/or the California DOJ, just so everyone's clear about what the fifth question is asking from the task force. How will reparations be paid and measured to ensure the form of payment aligns with the estimate of damages? Can you all just provide some clarity, either the economists or the California DOJ around that fifth question, just so we're clear?
I can briefly state what the economist's thought process is, and I think the DOJ might have some of the requirements based on the legislature that we're not experts on. I think our thought process was, as we estimate these damage categories and come up with estimates, what does it look like in terms of cash payment, in terms of programmatic relief? So over the time period that the task force has been meeting, we, the expert group, have been calculating specific harms with dollar amounts, something that's measurable. The task force, however, has done a lot more work on looking at different programs that seek to put in place reparations or redress, and not necessarily with a dollar amount. So things related to education, things related to health harms, putting institutions in place or programs in place that operationalize compensation, redress, and reparations. Again, not with a dollar amount. So very broad example, let's say we talk about mass incarceration, over policing. The expert group might come up with a dollar amount, whatever that is, or a range based on the harm. But the task force itself will have a lot of recommendations on what it looks like from a change in institutions, a change in what we do with prisons, a change with, for example, what we heard from a member of the public, prison land, for example. Those don't have a dollar amount. So while we estimate these harms and we have an amount, and at the same time we have programmatic relief and changes from the task force, I think our idea was this process of reconciliation and what it might look like. So we can get a clear understanding that even though we have a conservative estimate, the task force itself might be coming up with things that bolster what's necessary for reparations, redress, and compensation. That was our thought process from the expert group. Am I right, Kirsten and Thomas? Yeah, I don't know if the DOJ has anything else to add for 5.
Well, Ken, the California DOJ, can you clarify, the task force isn't necessarily tasked with coming up with how reparations will be paid, right? Like identifying the funding sources, right?
That's correct. I mean, the task force is required by AB 3121, I keep reversing those, to recommend to the legislature methods for calculating reparations and the scope of reparations. Based on the recommendations, the legislature is ultimately tasked with implementing those changes into law and figuring out how to pay for it.
Thank you so much, California DOJ and the economists. Are there any last comments or questions? If not, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. We're one step closer. All right. So the next item on the agenda is number 6, discussion and potential action. Subpoena Advisory Committee report and recommendations presented by members Holder, member Tamaki with DOJ Research Center.
Thank you, Chair Moore. We're waiting for the DOJ staff, Randy Chance and Tiffany Jance, to set up, and Robin Goldfaden. A few days ago, and I'll turn it over to you all, Tiffany and Randy and Robin on this. But we've been working on the survey for quite a long time. However, in terms of the practical matter of collecting the data and all that, the time is still very shortened. It's very truncated. But we got a final version of the report just a few days ago, actually, and because of the amount of work and time that's gone into it. The DOJ is going to present an overview of what the findings are, but we want to have a more robust discussion and give it the time that the contents deserves at the next meeting. Lisa and I will give kind of an overview of the findings after the DOJ presents the data. The report itself is almost, it's 88 pages long, and it's a lot of data. And so the distillation of that and what it means, I think it really deserves a fulsome presentation that Lisa and I are not prepared to do because the report was finalized just a few days ago, but we can sort of highlight some of the basic things. We did want to make sure that the public got a copy of the report, at least to read it and begin to digest it. But a more full discussion will happen at the next meeting. But I did want to now turn it over to Tiffany Jance of the Research Center to give an overview. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for having us this morning. We're happy to be here to present to the task force. My name is Dr. Randy Chance. I serve as the director of the Department of Justice Research Center. And here with me today is Dr. Tiffany Jance, and she's a supervisor in the Research Center. So we're going to talk a little bit about the questionnaire that was administered by the Research Center. And so central to the Racial Justice Act is the availability of certain data to make claims of racial bias. Next slide. So in support of the task force, the Subpoena Advisory Committee directed the Research Center to distribute an online questionnaire assessing the administrative practices around race data collection at superior courts, county district attorney offices, and city attorney offices. The survey consisted of about 60 questions covering 6 content areas: case management use, demographics, arrest and matter information, own recognizance, custody and bail, diversion, and prosecutorial decision-making and outcomes. Next slide. Oh, sorry. The questionnaire was distributed on May 4th, 2022, and closed on June 12th, ending our first round of data collection. A second round of data collection was conducted in an attempt to reach those who had not responded to the questionnaire. Attorneys from the Civil Rights Enforcement section called non-responders to encourage that participation beginning August 11th, 2022. An additional follow-up by email was conducted in late 2022, and the questionnaire was formally closed on December 31st, 2022. Next slide. As you can see here, we had all 11 city attorney offices and all 58 superior courts respond, with 57 district attorney offices responding. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Tiffany, who will walk you through a summary of those responses. Next slide.
Thank you. I will be presenting a summary of some of the main findings of the survey. You can find all of these findings as well as others summarized in the report that's presented in the public meeting materials. The subpoena advisory panel was interested in learning about the prevalence of case management systems in the California justice agencies. Whether an office uses an electronic case management system can impact the ease with which records are extracted for evaluation. So we surveyed the California district attorneys as well as the superior courts and select city agencies. Here you see a summary of the responses from all reporting agencies. Almost all agencies, 122 out of 126 or 97% reported they use a case management system. Kern County District Attorney, Sierra County District Attorney, Hawthorne and Redondo Beach City attorneys reported not using a case management system. Of those who use a case management system, 119 or 98% said that they use a software program, and 95% said that they have records that are available via electronic inquiry. 78% of these offices began recording data in their CMS in 2015 or prior, which means that 22% of offices have begun collecting data as of 2016 or later. Next, the superior courts and attorney offices were asked about demographic data they collect. If an office does not collect data on the race of the accused individual, a lack of this data could severely limit the presentment and evaluation of claims that may mask racial disparities. According to the responding agencies, information related to race was collected in 97% of California counties, by 45 superior courts or 78%, and 46 district attorneys offices or 81%, or some combination of the two. I'll note though, on the map to your left, the accused race map, you'll see the two counties in magenta. Those are both Glynn County and Sacramento. This is indicating that neither of these counties had a district attorney or superior court that reported collecting an accused individual's race, which could present a heightened challenge for Racial Justice Act claims in these specific counties. The race of the complainant or the victim is also an important variable when investigating claims that charges, sentences, or convictions are influenced not only by the accused individual's race, but the interplay between the accused individual's race as well as the victim's race. However, there are a number of counties in the state of California for which no office collects the victim's race data in terms of the superior courts and the district attorneys. 74% of counties do collect this data, though again, you'll see in the graph to the right, those in magenta are the counties that do not collect, have neither their DA office nor the superior court office collect victim race data. The majority of those who do collect victim race data are the district attorney's offices. Next slide, please. We also looked at the decision to prosecute, file charges, and release, as these decisions might be influenced by law enforcement charges as well as an accused individual's prior criminal record. Agencies from 95% of California counties record law enforcement charges. Alpine, San Joaquin, and Stanislaus County agencies report not collecting law enforcement agency charges at either the Superior Court or District Attorney level. For matters, over half of the responding agencies, or 52%, record prior criminal information, including charges, convictions, and matters. Neither DA nor Superior Courts in over a quarter of California counties reported recording past convictions associated with the accused individual, and that is demonstrated by the map to the right. Next slide. The subpoena advisory panel also requested data collected on record keeping around the release and custody of accused individuals. In order to determine whether there is a racial bias in decisions to release an accused individual on their own recognizance, set bail, or hold someone without bail, data related to these decisions would need to be collected. The survey indicated that 97% of counties record data on whether or not a person was released on their own recognizance at bail or arraignment hearing. Placer and Madera County DAs and Superior Courts, however, did not record this data. 93% of Superior Courts and 53% of District Attorney offices reported whether bail was set, denied, or own recognizant release granted. Humboldt, Merced, and Placer County Superior Courts and 30% of the District Attorney offices surveyed reported not collecting any data on bail-related information requested. 54 counties, or 93% of California's counties, collect data on whether a person was held in custody pre-plea, and most Superior Courts reported whether an accused individual was held pre-trial or pre-plea. So those are the two maps that are demonstrated here and that are also in the report. Next slide, please. We were also asked to look at diversion data. Diversion programs allow some defendants to choose to complete treatment or education courses instead of serving jail time. Information on whether a diversion program was offered, when, and if it was accepted would be needed to investigate claims of racial bias in diversion program offers and sentencing more generally. What we found in the survey was that 41 California counties, or 71%, collect information on whether a diversion offer is made. You'll note that in your graph to the left, diversion offered, there's a large swath of California counties that are represented in magenta, meaning that neither the Superior Court nor the DA collects that information. 52 counties, or 90%, collect data on whether a diversion program was accepted, so there is an increase there. Del Norte, Merced, Mariposa, Madera, and Santa Cruz County DAs and Superior Courts do not collect data on whether an offer has made or accepted for diversion programs. However, 100% of California counties collect data on whether a diversion program was completed. So there is substantial evidence on data on whether a diversion was completed. However, whether or not it was even offered is inconsistent. Next slide, please. We also looked at the decisions to prosecute. There is discretion in the determination to prosecute or decline to prosecute a case, a decision that's made by the district or city's attorneys. To substantiate claims of racial bias in the prosecution decisions, information on the justifications for charging or the declinations may be important. See that 96% of DAs reported collecting data on the date of the decision made to decline to prosecute if they did decline. 93% record the decision maker's name, and 91% of responding DAs reported the charges that were lodged and then dropped. Alpine and San Bernardino DA offices reported not collecting date. Alpine, Imperial, Monterey, Sierra, and Trinity counties DA offices reported not collecting charges associated with decline, and Alpine County DA reported not collecting any of these variables when it comes to determining to decline to prosecute. We also looked at plea offers. A plea offer or a reduced charge or sentence can be made to resolve a case rather than taking it to trial or going to verdict. To investigate claims of racial bias when granting plea offers, data on whether a plea offer was made, by whom, if there was a counteroffer, what the counteroffer was, all of these factors may be crucial. On the left side, you'll see the plea offer made data collected by all respondents, the DAs, the Superior Courts, and responding city attorneys. Just over half collect data on whether or not an offer was made by a prosecutor, less than half on whether it was made by the court. 60% collect data on whether an offer was accepted, and a quarter of respondents do not collect data regarding whether or not a plea offer was made. On the right side, you'll see the plea offers accepted data. 90% of respondents collect which counts plea offers for which plea offers were accepted, the sentence that was in exchange. However, 8% of respondents do not collect any of this information. A greater portion of the DA's and city attorney's office collect plea offers made data compared to the superior courts, while the reverse is true when it comes to the acceptance data. And I'll note that 1/4 of responding offices reported collecting none of the plea offers made data. Next slide, please. Finally, the subpoena advisory panel was interested in data collected around prosecution outcomes, which is a potentially and crucial data element when investigating claims of racial bias in our legal system. All superior courts across the state recorded the 5 elements: dismissal of charges, charges of conviction, probation, prison and jail sentences, and dismissal of enhancements. Alpine and Ventura County DAs do not report collecting any of the prosecution data elements presented. You can move to the next slide. So that was a lot of data, and there's even more and more graphs in the report. But the overarching conclusions from this survey are that in the absence of requirements for consistent data collection, there appears to be a large amount of discretion and likewise variability in what data elements are collected across the state of California by district attorneys, superior courts, and select city offices. And this varies both across office type as well as across county. The lack of consistency and absence of data on key variables could present substantial challenges to presenting and evaluating claims of racial discrimination in the criminal justice system, and could increase the difficulty of making Racial Justice Act violation claims in some California counties more than others. Next slide, please. To our knowledge, this survey was conducted on behalf of the Subpoena Advisory Panel, and the task force is one of the first of its kind to collect this sort of data, and a huge first step in determining data availability around prosecutorial and judicial decision makings in the state of California. Like all research, however, it's not without its limitations. This is an initial survey and can only speak to what information is reported by the offices that responded about their offices. I want to note that these survey methods do not differentiate between data collected by case management systems versus through hard copy or by other means. Some respondents provided that they do collect certain elements of data, but they can only be found in court notes or transcripts, so that may present a potential hurdle or barrier to collection of data. We also cannot speak to the accessibility, the quality or completeness of the data collected, or the categories of detail that are included. For example, while the vast majority of counties collect race data, we did not learn what specific races they collect, what categories, and if that varies by county or by office, which could again present an analytical challenge. Finally, the survey cannot verify the accuracy of the data reported by the survey respondents. Thank you very much for your time.
If I could just make some comments about your remarks. First, thank you for doing this work. It was a lot of work in terms of both framing the question so it becomes, the answers become clear and could be documented, but also following up and so on. In that regard, I mean, the response rate is gratifying, the fact that we've got so much. And the reason I say that is because advocates have long complained that when they make this request for this data, they haven't gotten the response, or the answer was they denied collecting it. So to bring this back as to the purpose, the Racial Justice Act, great that it passed, and it provides, remedies for bias seeping into the system. However, if there's no data, that the impact of that act is empty. For example, picking on Sacramento, if it's not collecting any data on the race of the accused. How could an accused person be able to demonstrate that for a particular charge, that they're being more prosecuted more severely, more harshly, and more frequently than, say, a white defendant? And so you absolutely need that data. It sounds kind of high level and scientific, but it's really a question of comparing apples to apples. If I'm treated unfairly, how do I prove that? There's bias, and you could see from the inconsistency and the variability from arrest to charging, the decision to prosecute, the decision to get a plea bargain, the decision to offer up diversion, sentencing, parole. I mean, bias can seep into every part of that process, and without data, it's very difficult to prove. So I think it's a good thing for the task force to at least begin to shine a light on that. And it does augment and make more meaningful the Racial Justice Act. But it does point, and we'll talk about this more in depth at the next hearing, that more needs to be done. And a set of recommendations will be included, including Lisa Holder, as Member Holder was proposing, which I think is a great idea, a sort of a commission to oversee, this process. There's a couple other things I want to mention and invite the panel to comment. So Assembly Bill, is it 2418, was passed in the 21-22 session, which is called the Justice Data Accountability and Transparency Act. And we began our survey process before that act actually passed. But the good thing, the gratifying thing, is our questions about, and you could review them in the survey public report about what we're focusing in on. Those are pretty much exactly what AB 2418 was focusing on too, and in a more comprehensive and more enforceable way, to get district attorneys and city attorneys and courts to provide, this information. But the enforceability had two severe limitations. I'm talking about the bill. One, it doesn't become operable until year 2027. This is obviously 2023. So why can't we accelerate? That would be one recommendation to the legislature arising from our survey. But also the collection of the data is contingent upon funding, and it was not funded. So basically it sits there. And so I think one of the recommendations of this task force is to get that moving and begin to collect the data. I will say something else too. In reading the report, you could see that 70%, 80% of district attorneys say they're collecting the race of the accused, the race of the victim, have data on whether decisions to prosecute or decisions to drop the case or diversion. These are all very critical to the issue of mass incarceration. But the question that we don't know, and I'm glad they're using electronic systems. That was another, we didn't know that. But the question is, do those programs, does the software allow you to make a question and get the data you want? And if it's not, that the program isn't set up that way, it won't produce it. And so if they're then collecting the data, does that mean a defendant has to manually go through hundreds and maybe thousands of cases in which the charges are the same to determine if they're being treated unfairly, if they're a victim of racial bias? So it's very important, I guess what I'm saying is that the process be electronicized, and so the data can come out fairly instantly. Another recommendation that Member Holder is making is that the let's see, I'm sorry. That we have an enhanced right of discovery. Discovery meaning a defendant can make the request for this information in order to determine, if Black American defendants are being prosecuted, for example, more severely, sentenced longer, denied diversion more, and so on. And so the right, that Racial Justice Act has little meaning if you don't have the right to compel the agency to produce the information. So again, I think that will end up as part of another recommendation we'd ask the task force to approve to be included in the final report. Do you have anything to add, Lisa?
I think that was a great summary as to why this is important. I'm just going to say a couple of things. I want to thank all of these analysts for doing a tremendous job. You've been working at this for over a year, and my God, you've walked us through the data. There were so many different iterations of this process, and you did it so graciously and expertly. So thank you all. I just want to underscore the conversation that we had earlier with our economists, where they talked about the challenges of addressing systemic harm to Black people when you don't have complete data sets, when you don't know where they're housed, when you don't know how they are being collected or whether they are being collected. It makes this work of remediating all these systemic harms very, very difficult. And so that's why this project is really important, because we know that the so-called criminal justice system, which is better termed a criminal legal system, is one of the most atrocious systems when it comes to harming Black folks. And we have to make sure that the data is being collected systematically and uniformly so that we can be the watchdogs and make sure that we're analyzing the data and that we are compelling them to treat Black people equally and fairly. So that's why this process that you've all supported us with is so important.
Robin, Randy, Tiffany, do you have anything to add or just want to create space for you?
I think the main thing I would add right now is there's built into the question about the data collection is how far back it goes, because at the time the survey was conducted, the Racial Justice Act was applicable to cases where a judgment was entered on or after January 1st, 2021, if I recall correctly, and it's since been made retroactive. So that if you are seeing challenges in the data during the time that it's actually being collected, you can only imagine how bad it is when you go back further in time. So that's one issue that I would highlight. Another is that, as you noted, there was this piece of legislation that hasn't been funded. And so some of the mechanisms that were built into that statute are currently unfunded. And finally, I would just note that this is a relatively new statute. There are not a lot of court decisions on there yet. And so you may see issues of interpretation coming down the pike that may or may not need a legislative response at that point.
I can see where at least the survey and the data we have so far, and what they're collecting, what they're not collecting, and the inconsistencies will be helpful for legislators to see why there needs to be the next step, next iteration, and funding of the collection of the data and so on. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's give it up for the DOJ Research Center and for your very hard work over the past year and a half. Thank you also, Member Holder and Member Tamaki. So the next item on the agenda is lunch. So we'll break to lunch at 15 minutes early. We'll return at 1:45 p.m. We have an amazing dynamic panel around implementation. Then we'll hear from our communications firm and then from local municipal reparations efforts.